Pirate God Level Cartoonist, Chapter 61-80. Chapter 61 Gene Crash, 3/4. Roja stood on top of the tsunami, like a king looking down at Anilu who was fleeing in a hurry. His eyes were cold. Body of God, elementalized, can't beat you without armed arrogance. Ridiculous. Anilu, who was constantly jumping on the ruins, saw that he was about to reach the edge of the ruins. He looked back at the tsunami that was gradually approaching behind him, and the panic on his face became more and more intense. Die. Roja's eyes were sharp, and a huge wave crashed towards Anilu. At this point, Anilu was already standing on the edge of the ruins of the Ark, and there was no more springboard. Damn it. Electric light flashed wildly on Anilu's body, and instantly smelted the golden scepter in his hand into several discs. Throwing the disc out, Anilu turned into an electro-optical jump, avoiding the waves dangerously. Just when he breathed a sigh of relief, the roaring sound resumed behind him. A wave that was far bigger than before was photographed head-on. No! Anilu roared, and an unprecedented electric light burst forth from his body, instantly turning into a giant of thunder and lightning, and slapped the tsunami with one palm. 200 million volts for. Boom. The loud explosion sounded, and the waves were forcibly punched out by Anilu. Taking this opportunity, Anilu jumped high and tried to cross the tsunami from above Roja. But just as he was halfway through the flight, a terrifying aura like a giant dragon descended suddenly appeared and enveloped the sea. Anilu was in a trance for a moment, and he was forced out of the electric light state by Roja's overlord color. Before Anilu could react, the surrounding air suddenly turned into a storm, blowing him towards the sea. Anilu, who fell towards the sea, watched as thousands of tons of seawater were photographed head-on, with despair in his eyes. Boom. The sea swept through, and in the face of the tsunami, Anilu, who claimed to be a god, was helpless and sank to the bottom of the sea powerless. Scoff. An iron rod broke through the water and penetrated Anilu's chest, blood-filled. Is it so far? Anilu watched the blood pouring out of his chest, and his eyes gradually darkened. He has not yet reached the infinity. He just can't stand someone with the same power as him as a god. Glancing at Anilu's body coldly, Roja turned and flew in the direction of Monet and the others. Returning to the ship, turning into the body, Roja went straight to the cabin, opened the door, and happened to meet Misaka Makoto to come out. How are you? Before Roja could speak, a burst of electricity suddenly appeared on his body, and he swam all over his body in an instant. Before falling into a coma, Roja vaguely saw that Misaka Makoto, who was in a panic, had just withdrawn her hand, and there was still electricity in her hand that had not dissipated. My Nima, didn't the young man just take advantage of the flight with you and touch the places that shouldn't be touched a few times? As for calling me like this. The aggrieved Roja rolled his eyes and completely fainted. I don't know how long it took before Roja woke up leisurely. When he opened his eyes, he was lying on Monet's lap, surrounded by worried Monet, Sugar, and Misaka Makoto. After struggling for a while, Roja covered his head and sat up slowly, and he was electrocuted by Misaka Makoto so close, and his chest is still a little numb. Brother, slow down. Monet supported Roja and stood up. Misaka Makoto next to her saw Roja's uncomfortable look, her pretty face blushed, and her hands behind her back kept stirring. The end, she bowed sharply to Roja and said, yes. I'm sorry, I didn't see Accelerator who came in. I thought you were defeated, and only. Did you move your hand? It's okay, I don't blame you. Roja waved his hand, but after a while, the numbness on his body has disappeared a lot. Speaking of which, it is indeed Roja himself who has been communicating with Misaka Makoto through Accelerator's face. In such a tense situation, a person who does not know suddenly appears, no matter who will do it. Unfortunate. Roja scratched his head and helped Misaka Makoto up. Don't be in a hurry to apologize, where's Haitsi? I'll have a little medical skills, let me see how she's doing. As soon as he heard that Roha could learn medicine, Masaka Makoto hurriedly took Roha to the cabin where Kuroko was resting. As soon as he entered the cabin, Roha saw Kuroko lying unconscious on the bed. Sitting by the window, Roha gently lifted Kuroko's messy hair, and frowned suddenly. "Did you start to have a high fever? How about sunspot?" Masaka Makoto stood behind her with a worried expression on her face. "Wait a minute, I'm looking." Roha replied without looking back. At the same time, his mind changed and he opened the system panel. Consuming skill fragments. Medicine Netherland Chasing Soul X1. The next moment, Masaka Makoto only felt that the aura of the man in front of him had changed, and an aura that was calm and used to life and death appeared on Roha. I saw that Roha changed his rustiness before, and quickly pressed Shirai Kuroko a few times, then opened her eyelids and looked. In the end, Roha's face was completely gloomy. "All out, Saber, stay." "What's wrong? What's wrong with Kuroko?" Masaka Makoto's eyes immediately turned red, and tears rolled in her eyes. "Overuse of ability. Gene collapse." Roha looked solemn. "You'd better go out quickly. For the next treatment, I must ensure that my side is absolutely quiet, otherwise she is likely to die." Gene collapsed. Masaka Makoto collapsed to the ground, crying and covering her cheeks. "Kuroko. Kuroko, I'm sorry for you." Sanji pulls her out, and immediately leaves the sea. Roha ordered sharply. Soon, the room became quiet, except for Shirai Kuroko. There were only Roha and Artoria. "Saber, can you control Avalon's healing range?" Roha turned his head and asked. "Okay." Arturia nodded. "Okay, then, wherever I ask you to treat, you can treat where you want, and there must be no mistake." Immediately, Roha used a very fast speech rate to explain to Arturia about the knowledge of treatment and the breakdown of the ability user's genes. The gene collapse of the ability person mostly occurs when the ability is overused. Once it happens, the gene with superpower in the body will cause a chain reaction. Mutation, death. In this case, extensive treatment should never be used, as that would increase the normal gene activity and cause early exposure to the mutated gene, resulting in accelerated spread. The only way is to cure the mutated genes little by little until all the mutated genes are converted into normal genes. During the explanation, Roha quickly looked at the stock of fragments in the system. Skill fragment, Medicine Netherland Chasing Soul X3. Quest fragment, Netherland Chasing Soul X1. 4 minutes. Roha took a deep breath. It was enough. First and foremost, we want to make sure that the treatment is foolproof and that no fabric can obscure my judgment. Arturia. Roha blushed, and just as he was about to explain, he saw that Arturia was over. After she was done, she raised her head. "I believe in you." Seeing that some of the skin on Kuroko Shirai was already necrotic, Roha stopped joking and started treatment. When his hand touched Shirai Kuroko's skin, he clearly felt Shirai Kuroko tremble. Roha reacted instantly. I am afraid that Kuroko Shirai had already woken up, but it was completely unable to move because of the genetic collapse. "I'm sorry, but I'll take care of it." Roha whispered softly in Kuroko Shirai's ear, and then immediately consumed the fragments. Start treatment. == 3 review. HPHH time. 0115201870. 07 p.m. #unpublished. By bike time. 0116201882. 53 p.m. #review. By bike time. 0116201882. 53 p.m. #specific review. By bike time. 0116201882. 53 p.m. #specific. Chapter 62 Bucky Annihilated. In the room, the treatment that raced against time finally ended. Roha looked at the fragments of Netherland Chasing Soul that he had consumed, and his heart was full of a sense of accomplishment. Finally rescued. Gently covering Shirai Kuroko with a blanket, Roha got up and was about to leave. Suddenly, a small hand grabbed the corner of his clothes. Turning his head to look, he saw Shirai Kuroko's slightly opened eyes. "Thank you." Kuroko Shirai murmured. "But I won't like you. I like my sister. My sister the most." "Okay, your sister likes you the most too." Roha smiled and stuffed Kuroko Shirai's hand back into the blanket, turned and walked out of the door. Behind him, Kuroko Shirai fell into a drowsy sleep. Before falling asleep, Roha's appearance appeared in her mind for no reason, and she finally focused on Roha's tear mole. "What if she looks good? I like my elder sister the most." Shirai Kuroko murmured, blushing a little. When he told everyone that Kuroko Shirai was all right, Misaka Makoto cried and hugged Roha tightly. "Thank you, thank you, thank you for saving Kuroko." "Okay, it's okay, you also go to rest, and Kuroko will be taken care of by us." Roha patted Misaka Makoto's back and comforted softly. "No, I want to watch her 607 get better." After finishing speaking, Misaka Makoto also noticed her excitement, blushed and broke free from Roha's arms, turned and ran into the room. How do I feel like I've forgotten something?" Seeing Misaka Makoto rushing into the room, Roha scratched his head and muttered to himself. "Luo body." Artoria made up the knife beside her. "Shit, forget this." At the same time, a piercing scream came from the room. Before Roha could react, the door of the room was slammed open, and Misaka Makoto, who was covered in electricity, appeared in front of him. Tisk, it's troublesome, Roha thought. In a blink of an eye, time passed quickly, and Roha and his group also successfully sailed out of the Great Route and arrived at Rog Town. After arriving at Rog Town, a group of girls walked off the boat happily and went shopping. And Roha told Sanji to stay and watch the ship, and walked to the shipyard himself. It was originally intended to carry 4 people on a cruise ship, but suddenly there were more Sanji, Misaka Makoto, and Shirai Kuroko, and the room suddenly seemed a little insufficient. Roha naturally came up with the idea of changing a ship. Not to mention, as soon as he arrived at the shipyard, CHCO, he let him buy a big ship. I heard that it was used as a cargo ship before, and the owner of the ship went bankrupt and had to sell it. After paying the money and instructing the shipyard to remodel the cargo ship, Roha walked slowly towards the town center. At this time, at the other end of Rogue Town, in front of a newsstand, a group of people quarreled. "Boss Bucky, you can't buy it anymore. If you buy it again, we won't be able to keep the last boat." Cabbage hugged Bucky tightly with a look of grief and anger. "We've already lost everything anyway, so what should I spend? As long as we win SSR, no, as long as we win 1 SR, we will have money to buy." Bucky's upper body suddenly broke free from Cabbage's embrace and flew out. "Boss, 100 more fantasy magazines. Hurry up and stop the captain. I really can't buy it anymore. We can't even afford to buy it again." Cabbage hugged Bucky's lower body tightly and roared. The crew of the Bucky pirates on the side woke up like a dream, and a large group of people rushed up, pressing Bucky under them. "Don't stop me, don't stop me, let me buy one more time, really the last time." Bucky kept struggling. The hands flew out and were held down. The palm flew out and was held down. In the end, all the members of the pirates fell to the ground, holding down part of Bucky's body. "Boss, here's a copy of the Sea Dragon magazine." Just when the pirates were pressing Bucky, a voice sounded in front of the newsstand, and the pirates looked up subconsciously. I saw a tall man wearing a white suit vest and dark blue shirt, wearing a green blindfold in broad daylight, appeared in front of the newsstand and bought a magazine. RIP_. The sound of tearing the package sounded, and the tall man took out the card stuck to the cover. "Wow, sir, you are really lucky. It's actually SR Hawkeye. I heard that it is worth 30 million berries in the black market." The newsstand owner stretched his neck and exclaimed. "It's all right, all right." The tall man smiled slightly, put the card in his pocket, and stood in front of the newsstand and looked at it. "Let go of me," Bucky said suddenly. "Boss, I really can't buy any more." Cabbage quickly persuaded. Don't talk nonsense, let me go, don't let that person run away. Bucky whispered. Boss, you want. Cabbage was overjoyed, and subconsciously glanced at the tall man beside the newsstand. Nonsense, you won't forget that we are pirates. How can pirates see 30 million berries and don't do it? Come on, let me go, it will be too late when the naval patrol arrives. The eyes of the surrounding pirates lit up, they got up one after another, reached out to touch the weapon on their waist, and surrounded the newsstand with bad intentions. Hey, that idiot, get acquainted, and hand over the SR to this uncle as soon as possible, otherwise, don't blame us for being rude. After speaking, Bucky laughed wildly, and the heavens paid off. Bucky was finally about to turn over. Oh, pirates. The tall man raised his head slowly with a playful look in his eyes, but he didn't expect that there were still pirates who didn't know him. Sure enough, I'm still far from Mr. Carp. The tall man shook his head humbly, and the ice spread under his feet. 10 minutes later, a naval patrol arrived in a hurry. Aokiji lifted his head from the magazine and glanced at the surrounding ice sculptures. These are pirates, take them back. After saying that, Aokiji also stood up and walked slowly in the direction of the military pier. At this time, there was a busy scene on the dock. 2 huge warships were moored on the sea, and countless navies were carrying supplies up and down. As soon as they arrived at the pier, Aokiji saw Cap sitting on a wooden box, quietly eating senbei. Silently came to Garp's side. Aokiji leaned on the wooden box and read the magazine. Aokiji, are you afraid of death? Garp said suddenly. Of course I'm afraid, Shinzi said with a free and easy expression, but I'm more afraid of dying in obscurity. If I can die in the battle with the 4 Emperor pirates, and die by Mr. Garp's side, I will be honored. Ha 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 ha, good boy, and my taste. Carp burst out laughing, patted his butt and stood up. It's just the 4 Emperor pirates, the old man hasn't put them in his eyes yet. Let's go, I heard that the red-haired pirates have already started their return journey to Windmill Village. It's time for us to dispatch. Understood. Aokiji, with the manga in between, followed Garp step by step. Just like when he was young, he looked forward to the hero's back and followed him step by step. Chapter 63 Zoro appears, 1/4. At the other end of Rog Town, Roha took Sanji into a weapons store. Welcome. As soon as he entered the door, the boss behind the counter came out and greeted Roha. Sir, what kind of weapons do you want to see? The boss rubbed his hands, walked eagerly in front of Roha, and out of the corner of his eyes, he inadvertently swept Roha all over his body. In the end, it stayed on Roha's palm like white jade without any trace of exercise. Big client, rich kids. In an instant, the boss affixed the label of a fat sheep to Roha, and classified Roha into the category where the nobles bought knives for their appearance. Most of the weapons introduced to Roha are gorgeous in appearance, beautifully decorated, and more ornamental than practical. After looking around for a while, Roha also noticed the boss's thoughts, raised his brows, and didn't bother to talk nonsense with him. Roha took out a box of money directly from the storage space and put it on the counter. Boom! The huge cash box slammed on the counter, causing the counter to creak. Roha opened the cash box, and the huge amount of banknotes suddenly caught the boss's eyes. Guest, you. The boss was a little shivering when he spoke. Such a big box of money, at least 10 million bells. To be able to come up with so much money, what is the origin of this young man in front of him? 10 million bellies, I want to buy 3 generations of Gush, Shizuo, and Wajo. Every time Roha reported a name, the flesh on the boss's face twitched, and when Roha finished speaking, the boss was already crying. No, this lord, the small shop does have these 3 knives, but they are all treasures of the town shop and not for sale. For the boss's reaction, Roha had long expected. Every such store will definitely have some treasures of the town store. The purpose is not to sell, but to attract customers. If you rashly sell out the treasures of the town store, I am afraid that within a month, the business in the store will drop by half or even more. But what does it matter? Roha now lacks fans, lacks comics, but lacks ability, lacks time, but does not lack money. Boom. Roha took out another cash box, still on the counter. 20 million berries, are you going to sell it? Guessed. That. The boss's lips moved, and he couldn't say a word. It took him 10 years to find the 3 famous knives. It took him 10 years to find them. Whether he can find the 4th knife in the future is still unknown, and it is not something that can be measured by money. However, this guest is also too generous. Boom, boom. 40 million. Roha looked indifferent, as if throwing out just boxes of waste paper. Not for sale. Then use the money to hit you to sell. 10 minutes later, Roha was satisfied, and when he came out of the weapons store, there were already 3 more knives on his waist. 21 jobs with big sharp knife, Wajo. Good and fast swords with 50 workers, 3 generations of ghosts and snow. Next, go to the execution stand. For this place where Roger was executed, Roha has long wanted to take a look. Just when Roha was visiting the execution platform square, he suddenly saw a group of people hurriedly running into the distance, each with a flushed face with excitement. Hurry up, they're gone when it's late. Really, Hiro, Garp and Lieutenant General Aokiji. That's fake, my cousin saw it on the dock with his own eyes. Don't talk nonsense, go quickly, it's late, but you won't be able to see these 2 big men. The crowd in a hurry, talking while walking. Roha stood on the spot, looking at the direction they were heading, and the blue and white navy flag could be vaguely seen. Cap, Aokiji, it seems that he came here on purpose after watching One Piece. Only, what are they going to do? Take the walk to fly, or try to drive Shanks away? Quietly pondering for a while, Roha suddenly shook his head and smiled self-deprecatingly. Why do you think so much? You won't know if you keep up. Immediately, Roha no longer hesitated, set off back to the boat, told Sanji that he would be away for a while, and asked them to continue the journey after changing to a new boat. After listening to Roha's instructions, Sanji didn't ask too much, but only asked where to meet. Roha thought for a while, and suddenly saw the calendar on the wall, and a flash of light flashed in his mind. Isn't it right today, when the second half of the first volume of One Piece is being serialized, it's just right to go there. You go to a place called Seymour Jiji Village, and find the owner of the Yixin Dojo, Kushiro, who is said to be a man who wears a green coat all the year round and has red square tattoos on his face. He will provide you with where I live, I'll find you when I'm done. Understood, master. Sanji silently recited the name of Seymour Jiji Village several times in his heart and nodded. Looking at Sanji with an indifferent face, Roha couldn't help snickering in his heart. There is a green-haired fool who is your lifelong enemy, but I don't know if the 2 little guys who met 10 years in advance will be pinched like in the original book. Roha, who snickered, turned around and left, quietly came to the military dock, knocked out a Navy soldier in the corner, put on his Navy uniform and walked out. Before leaving, Roha glanced at the Navy who was thrown into the trash can by himself, and muttered an apology. Big brother, I'm really sorry, who told you that your body shape is so similar to mine? I can only aggrieve you, and now stay in the trash for one night. A few hours later, Roha boarded a warship, mixed with the busy sailors, and sailed towards the sea. East China Sea, Seymour Jiji Village. Sauron was carrying a huge rock and was climbing the mountain for his daily training routine. At this moment, suddenly 2 little boys hurried down the mountain. Sauron, the new issue of Dream magazine is out. Come on Zoro, let's watch it together, the person on the cover of the magazine is very similar to you. Ah, what? Zoro carried the rock on his back with an impatient look on his face. I didn't see that, I was busy, you guys watch it first, and I'll watch it later. Oh, all right. The two little boys glanced timidly at the boulder on Soren's body, sat down obediently and read the comics. But within a few minutes, they exclaimed again. Sauron! Sauron! Come and see, this man has the same name as you. Sauron, this man looks exactly like you, isn't he your brother? What the hell are you talking about? Where did my brother come from? Now even Zorro was curious. He threw the stone behind him with a thud, took the comics directly from his junior brother's hand, and then watched their progress. The first thing that catches the eye is the first time Luffy sees Zorro, and Zorro is tied to a stake. Che, to be tied to a stake, what a shame. Zorro wanted to sneer, but found that he couldn't open his mouth. He had a vague feeling that the person on the painting was himself. Chapter 64 Save Guina, 2/4. The comic continues, and the more I read, the more Zorro feels that this person is himself. 3 swords, Roronoa Zorro, turban, bad-tempered, Liu Kai, of course, the last Zorro was killed and did not admit it. Prophecy. Zorro suddenly remembered what the master said in a low voice when he was reading a cartoon to the master a few days ago. Am I going to be like this in the future? With curiosity, Zorro continued to read. Suddenly, the style of painting changed, and the screen switched to the memories of Roronoa Zorro in the comics. The younger brother, the master, and Guina appeared one after another, and Zorro's mood became more and more heavy. According to the previous comics, it is very likely that in this memory, extremely unfortunate things happened. When he saw the end of the memory, the magazine in his hand fell to the ground and his fingers kept shaking. Guina is dead. Guina, who has always been stronger than him and bullied him every day, actually fell off the 2nd floor so easily and died. There was a hint of coolness on his face, and it was only at this time that Zorro realized that he had already burst into tears. Hey, the 3 of you. It's time to eat. Come back quickly. Suddenly, Guina's voice came from down the mountain. Huh, Guina. Zorro raised his head quickly, only to see Guina Yamashita waving to them. At this time, he broke free from the grief just now, and Guina is not dead. Still alive and well. Wiping away his tears 803, Zorro rushed down the mountain in 3 steps and 2 steps. When he was approaching Guina, his face suddenly turned red, and he hurriedly walked away to the dojo. Hey, Zorro, what are you doing waiting for me to go so fast? Sauron, why are your eyes red? You shouldn't cry. Sauron, why don't you speak, so you won't be dumb? Guina was chatting beside Zorro, but no matter what she said, Zorro didn't answer, just walked towards the dojo. When he came to the dojo, he saw one house after another on the dojo. Zorro clenched a wooden knife in his hand tightly. Guina, I will never let you die. That night, in Kushiro's room. Kushiro silently brewed a pot of tea for himself, with a fantasy magazine in his hand. Slowly opening the magazine, the page stayed at the section where Guina died. Kushiro's eyes were filled with a hint of uncontrollable fear. On the road of Kendo, this great swordsman who rarely meets an opponent has never felt that his state of mind is so messy. For the sake of his daughter, he was willing to remain anonymous and withdraw from the great world, for nothing but to give his daughter a stable childhood. But now, information about him and his daughter has been made public. He can predict that in the near future his former enemies will come to you, and people who have bad thoughts because of the High 10 comics will also come to you, and there will be no peace in the dojo. But Kushiro couldn't resent Gaushi, because if something really happened, then Gaushi's comics would indirectly save his daughter's life. Can you tell me what to do? Kushiro was a little confused, stroking the only family portrait he kept, and asked softly to his wife above. After a while, Kushiro's eyes fluctuated a few times, and then he gave out a firm gaze. I swear by my sword that I will definitely protect you. Kushiro gently stroked Guina's portrait, sword intent bursting out of his eyes. Anyone who wants to hurt Kushiro's daughter must ask him whether he agrees with the sword in his hand. Click, click. Suddenly outside the house, a burst of wood broke, and the sound of the house collapsing came. Kushiro's eyes narrowed. He grabbed the sword beside him, and rushed out of the room in the blink of an eye. As soon as he left the room, Kushiro saw the target at a glance. A small figure, carrying a long knife that did not fit his body, rushed to another warehouse. Behind him, a warehouse has been turned into ruins. Sauron, what are you doing? Kushiro shouted fiercely. Zoro, who was running, glanced at Kushiro, but didn't stop at all. When he jumped up, he slashed with a knife and slashed at the pillar of the warehouse. Click. It wasn't over yet, when Zoro drew back his knife and slashed it with another jumping knife. But before he could swing the knife, Kushiro appeared behind him and grabbed the knife with one hand. Sauron, I'll ask you again, what are you doing? Kushiro got a little angry. Give me the knife, I want to save Guina. As long as these houses are demolished, Guina will not fall to her death. Zoro pounced on Kushiro and reached out to grab the knife. Demolish the house and save Guina. Kushiro was puzzled at first, and then suddenly laughed out loud. What are you laughing at? Zoro was a little hairy when Kushiro laughed. Stop laughing, give me the knife. Sauron, if I want a knife, I can give it to you, but let me ask you, do you really want to protect Guina? Kushiro said sternly. Of course. Zoro didn't hesitate, but his face turned red as soon as he finished speaking. Well, here it is for you. Kushiro directly shoved the knife into Zoro's hand, causing Zoro to be stunned. I want to demolish the house, so you agree? Before he could react, he saw Kushiro facing him and drew out his knife. Master, what are you doing? Zoro was startled and stepped back. Take it apart for you. Kushiro smiled warmly, returning to his gentle dojo master appearance. Good. Although he didn't understand what was going on, he had always believed in Zoro who didn't want to understand, so he opened it when he turned around. Looking at Zoro, who was sweating profusely and kept busy, Kushiro's smile grew stronger and stronger. Guina will be handed over to you from now on, Zoro. Click, click, click. Zoro danced wildly with his long sword, and soon another warehouse collapsed. Zoro cut down more and more smoothly. After cutting down one room, he stopped and ran over to the next room. Holding the long knife in his hand, Zoro's face was full of pleasure. Tonight is really a good day. Not only can I save Guina, but I can also use a real knife, so cool. Seeing the messy ground, Kushiro took a sharp breath, and only then did he remember what he had forgotten. Sauron, stop it. Let's demolish the second floor. Keep the first floor. Sauron, that's the house. The juniors and juniors are all inside, so they can't be demolished. Hurry up. If you dismantle it again, the dojo will be destroyed. Little brat, I tell you to stop. For a time, chickens and dogs jumped in the whole yard, and many disciples also got up to watch the fun. Everyone goes back to me. You too, what are you doing? Don't let anyone sleep. A coquettish shout echoed in the yard, and Guina stuck her head out of the window with a dissatisfied face. The two, one big and one small, exchanged glances silently. Take it apart another day. Good master. Chapter 65 Garp vs. Red Hair Pirates, 3/4. A few days later, in a certain area of the East China Sea. The red-haired pirates are heading back towards the stronghold, Windmill Village. Captain, when we go back this time, it is estimated that the plot in the comics should happen. Although we have cleaned up all the bandits, the ones in the comics have been completely wiped out, but what about this? Lackey pointed to the scene in the comics where Luffy cut himself in order to prove that he was not afraid of pain. Gudong gudong gudong, Shanks gulps down the wine, and his face flushed with a smile after drinking. What does it matter? A scar is a man's medal. It's okay, it's okay. It turns out that it is. Lackey nodded, subconsciously touched the wine glass beside him, and felt empty. Hey, where's my wine? Lackey looked around, and finally saw an empty wine glass at Shanks' feet. Captain, you're taking my drink again. Ha ha ha, What does it matter? Yours is mine, hiccup, mine is not yours, hiccup. Ah, Shanks, my meat is gone, I fought with you today. There was a commotion on the deck. Jesus Cloth on the observation deck, looking at the playful deck, smiled happily. There are partners, there are adventures, this is the real life. However, I still want to drink a little. Why is it so coincidental? It's my turn to have a banquet when I look out, alas. Jesus Bu sighed, picked up the binoculars and looked around. I've been wandering in the East China Sea for more than half a year, and there's no such thing as a powerful guy at all. Do you want to propose to the captain to cancel the lookout thing first? What is that? Jesus Cloth frowned, and quickly turned the telescope to adjust the focus. After a while, he put down the telescope in disbelief, hurriedly lay on the edge of the observation deck, and shouted at the bottom. Captain, something happened. Look ahead. Hearing this, Shankston's eyes on the deck turned cold, the drunkenness on his face disappeared instantly, and he looked forward. The scene in front of him made even Shanks' jaw drop in shock. Ice, at a glance, it is full of thick solid ice. I don't know how many mile-long glaciers suddenly appeared in front of them, and they were still spreading towards the red foss. Click, click, click. In just a few tens of seconds, the glacier has spread to the bottom of the ship, wrapping it firmly. Redforth charged into the ice with inertia, and after shaking a few times, it didn't move at all. In the face of the sudden situation, everyone on the red-haired pirates reacted differently. Wow, awesome, there is such a big block of ice. This is the heartless Qpung of Lackey. What happened? #U. Attack. Where did it come from? This is the new crew on board. Q. Ice Age. Ben Beckman came to Shanks with a cigarette in his mouth. He is the only one who can cause this effect. Shanks nodded. The Navy with the strength of the General, Aokiji. Why is he here? Isn't he supposed to be at the Navy headquarters? The cadre on the side wondered. Why do you think so much? There are only 2 ships. Is it possible that there can be 3 or 4 generals? Shanks said with a toothpick in his mouth, even if there are 3 or 4 generals, it's not that we can't fight. Quote. Ha ha ha, that's it. The boss is the boss, and the brain's reaction is fast. Boss, domineering. Shanks, words suddenly diluted the dignified atmosphere on the ship. The crew members pulled out their weapons one after another and looked at the warship in the distance with a warlike expression on their faces. No matter what he came from, just hit it. They are the 4 emperors, the red hair pirates. On the other side of the glacier, Aokiji slowly removed his hand from the sea and exhaled a cold breath. After stepping hard on the ice surface and confirming that the ice surface is hard enough to fight to a certain extent, Aokiji nodded. Mr. Carp, it's all right. Thank you for your hard work. Carp patted Aokiji on the shoulder, then handed the navy cloak to the sailor beside him, and walked towards the red Firth step by step. Mr. Carp, really don't need me, Aokiji shouted behind him. Just be honest, a stinky boy under Rogers, the old man hasn't taken it to heart yet. Carp waved his hand without knowing, and walked alone on the ice, with a great momentum of forging ahead. Someone is coming. Why are you alone? Who? Look who it is. On the observation deck, Jesus Cloth took off the telescope in disbelief, and his throat was a little dry. Hero. Carp, Jesus Bu said in a hoarse tone. As soon as these words came out, there was an exclamation from the Red Foss. Hero Carp. That was the person who once hunted down Roger, the Pirate King. He was the top powerhouse in the world, and he actually came in person. Hey, what is this old man doing here? Shanks scratched his head and looked like he had a headache. Shanks, who used to be an intern on Roger's ship, knew very well the strength of this old man. 1 word, strong. 2 words, pervert. 3 words, perverted strong. It's just that Garp's biggest headache for Shanks is not his strength, but Garp's tenacity. Shanks has personally experienced it. At the beginning, Carp's pursuit was like a leather plaster. He didn't have to stop for 3 days in one place, and Carp would definitely come out, and this situation was not a month or 2 months, but continued. Years. Shanks frowned even more at the thought of being targeted by Garp. Being entangled by this old man, he won't have to hold a banquet in the future, just play hide and seek all day long. Beckman, we didn't seem to mess with him, did we? Shanks turned his head for help. Beckman's eyes changed suddenly, looking at Shanks with a look of mental retardation. You guy, don't you still know, Luffy is Garp's grandson, right? What? Shanks shouted, that brat is actually the grandson of the hero Garp. What? Luffy is Garp's grandson? No way, that kid didn't say anything. Ah, I remembered, Luffy didn't say that, his full name is Monkey D. Luffy, the same surname as Garp. Beckman looked at the crew around him speechlessly. What kind of goods did he find? And they were all the same as the captain. Oh yes, it's Monkey D. Luffy. Shanks clapped his palms, and immediately said with a sad face, that means the old man is really here to trouble us. The crew nodded in unison. Oh, forget it, I'll go take a look, you don't have to come here. With a sigh, Shanks jumped onto the ice and walked towards Garp. Chapter 66 Strong Intervention, 4 quarters. On the freezing glacier, Shanks and Garp stood opposite each other 10 meters away. Father, what's the matter? Shanks said with a smile. Go back, Garp said lightly. Go back to your new world, and never come to the East China Sea again. Back to the new world. Shanks gradually restrained the smile on his face. Father, I'm afraid I can't promise you this. Shanks pressed the hilt of his sword with an indifferent expression. I want to see that kid Luffy again. Shanks. Garp's eyes widened, invisible coercion rose from him instantly, and the glaciers under his feet shattered inch by inch. You must take Luffy to the pirate road. Stubborn old man. Shanks shook his head and drew the knife from his waist. I can't control which way Luffy goes, but I respect other people's dreams the most, and I won't let it go. The ultimate domineering emanated from Shanks' body and collided with Garp's aura. Click, click, click. The glacier between the two seemed to have been cut to one side by a knife, and a huge crack appeared, and the sea below could be seen vaguely. Imposing ripples swept across the entire sea. In the distance, on the naval warship, people kept falling down. Even on Shanks' ship, several people collapsed to the ground, causing the companions to burst into laughter. At this time, the two people who had been confronting each other finally made a move. A mediocre slash, no fancy punch, with the power of destroying the sky and the earth, slammed into each other. There is no shattering of the sky, no shattering of the earth, and there is only boundless silence. The wind was clear, the clouds were clear, the sea was blue, and the ice was still there, but nothing moved. Not good. The green pheasant raised his eyelids and hurriedly put his hands into the water again and began to reinforce the glacier. He could feel that in the blow just now, countless cracks had been shaken out of the entire glacier, and it was about to shatter. Boom. The aftermath of the battle between the two at the top of the world finally appeared. Without warning, the ice under our feet turned into ice powder, the clouds in the sky suddenly dissipated, and an unprecedented storm was generated from the place where the two fought, turning into a substantial wind and waves that swept the entire sea. The naval battleship that was caught off guard was suddenly blown across the sea. Boom. The two warships collided, and the shells in the ammunition warehouse suddenly exploded violently. However, when the explosion just occurred, the endless ice had already wrapped the ammunition warehouse, and the warship was protected dangerously. But even so, a large number of navies fell from warships, and those who fell into the water were fine. Some of the unlucky ghosts who fell on the glacier have broken their arms. On the other hand, on the Red Hair Pirates' side, as early as the moment when the two of Garp fought, a cadre shot to resist the aftermath of the fight. Between the two sides, a judgment is made. No one noticed that among the countless sailors who fell to the sea in the glacier, a slender sailor landed steadily on the glacier, looking at the place where Shanks and Garp fought. This is the strength of the world's top powerhouse. Roha pondered in a low voice, calculating the gap between himself and these two strengths. Just transforming with accelerator is definitely not enough. It may be that at the beginning, facing the two physical attacks, he can have the absolute upper hand, but if the essence of his ability is discovered, and he adopts the method of fighting, I am afraid that Roha will be forcibly ground to death. To know that Ace can play 5 days and 5 nights with Jinping, Garp and Shanks can only be longer. Of course, Roha is not without a trump card. When he is really forced to do it, he will fully urge the vector operation, pause the planet for 5 seconds, and everyone will die. However, this kind of trick that kills 1,000 enemies and loses 10,000 to oneself is not a good idea. At this moment, suddenly the glacier at the foot of Roha shook again. Looking up, it turns out that the battle between the two of Garp has become intensified, and the two of them have darkened to varying degrees. Armed arrogance. Roha raised his eyebrows, knowing that if they don't stop these two, they can't stop them anymore. Garp, do you really have to kill Luffy's dream? Shanks chopped down with a knife. Redhead, don't talk nonsense, I will never let you pirates get close to Luffy. Garp charged and punched out. At this moment, a vague shadow suddenly flashed from behind Garp, and the speed was extremely fast. Wherever he passed, the air made an ear-piercing crackling sound. Boom! Boom! 2 violent roars sounded in succession, and Garp and Shanks Jinghai discovered that their attack did not fall on each other, but was blocked by some powerful force. Before the two of them could see what happened, an overwhelming power came from the fist sword, and its power was no weaker than any of them. Unprepared, Shanks and Garp retreated together, and the glacier beneath their feet cracked and collapsed. In the center of the fight, the glacier turned into powder and fluttered. There was a sudden wind blowing between the sky and the earth, blowing away the ice powder in the sky. Shanks and Garp all stretched their necks and looked at the center with dignified eyes, wanting to see who they were, and they were able to block their attacks at the same time, and still have enough strength to fight back. After a while, when the ice powder covering the impact center 5.5 completely dissipated, and within the exposure period, Roha, who had changed back to the main body. There were broken ice blocks in the sea all around him, and there was only a column of ice under his feet. Who are you? Roha. The expressions of Shanks and Garp are very different. Shanks is full of surprise, while Garp is solemn. When his Shanks called out the man's name, his face was even more gloomy like a dark cloud. This strong man is the reinforcement of the Red Hair Pirates. The more he stared at Roha's face, the stronger the sense of familiarity in Garp's heart. Finally, he recalled that he had seen the portrait of this man in the secret documents of the Warring States period. Dimension Brigade, Agent, Roha. Chapter 67 The Most Extravagant Crew in History, 1/4. Yo Shanks, long time no see. Don't be in a hurry, Mr. Garp, I'm not here to fight. Roha jumped off the icicle and greeted the two with a smile. Little devil, what are you doing? Garp frowned, and he was battle-scarred, but he wouldn't believe each other just because of Roha's words, not to mention that Roha seemed to be very familiar with Shanks. Behind him, Aokiji was coming from a distance, but when he saw the cadres of the Red Hair Pirates also getting off the boat, he stood cautiously 100 meters away from Cap. The current situation is too tense. Aokiji does not dare to act rashly, otherwise it is very likely to cause a full-scale battle with the red-haired pirates. Okay, the two of you are relieved, let's sit down and talk. Saying that, Roha first sat on the ice, flipped his wrist and took out a few small pots of wine. Come to Shanks, this is a special wine that I brought to you specially for the 7 waters. Mr. Garp, come and try it too. Good boy, you know how to bring me wine. Shanks was stunned for a moment, and glanced at Garp. When he saw that Garp had no desire to do something, he sat down with a smile, picked up a jug of wine and started drinking. Garp, who was on the side, saw that both of them had already sat down, so he put away his thoughts of fighting, and sat down with a dignified expression. But when he smelled the strong aroma of wine, he couldn't help but pick up a pot of wine and take a few sips. "Mr. Carp is not afraid of me poisoning in wine," Roja said suddenly. Carp's eyes widened, and the wine in his mouth was neither spit, nor swallowed. "Ha ha ha, just kidding, if I really poisoned you in wine, I'm afraid Shanks wouldn't agree." Roja laughed when he saw Carp's shriveled appearance. "Stinky boy, you are still so fond of teasing people." Shanks on the side laughed and patted Roja on the shoulder. On the other side, after Carp finished drinking a jug of wine, he put the jug beside him, and suddenly said, "Tell me, what do you want to talk about? First of all, I will never let the redheads return to Windmill Village." "It's a coincidence, I have to go back," Shanks added sideways. For a while, the atmosphere between the two became tense again. Roja, who was sitting between the two, couldn't help rubbing his head with a headache. Originally, with the temperament of Shanks and Garp, if they met on other occasions, they might be able to sit down and have a good time together. But this time, Carp's favorite grandson was involved, and it was no wonder that Carp had a bad temper. In the end, how to adjust them? Roja meditated quietly. This time, in addition to his friendship with Shanks and his recognition of Garp, Roja has his own ideas. Today, he is still a law-abiding and good citizen. He needs a relatively strong navy to maintain world peace for him and ensure the development of comics. Therefore, Garp and Aokiji, no matter who they are, can't die with the red hair. During the Battle of the Pirates. Oh. Moment later, why an idea popped into his mind. "Na s% biao. Just do it." Roja hammered his palm excitedly. "Bu." At this moment, he suddenly felt that the atmosphere was a little wrong, and looked up. Hey, Garp and Shanks actually got on top again. One picked up the knife and the other clenched their fists. Stop fighting, you two, listen to me first." Roja hurriedly stopped the two of them. Seeing Roja stand up, Garp and Shanks looked at each other and sat down again. Roja knows why they cooperate so well. Shanks is out of trust in him, and Garp is completely afraid of him and Shanks teaming up. "Shanks, you want to go back to Windmill Village to complete the agreement with Luffy. It's better to encourage him to stick to his dreams, right?" Shanks nodded in agreement. "Master, you don't want to let a big pirate like Shanks get close to Luffy, and you don't want Luffy to be a pirate, right?" Carp also agreed. "Isn't it over, old man? Let me ask you, how sure are you about persuading Luffy to become a navy?" Roja clapped his hands and asked Carp. Hearing this, Garp raised his brows, his face turned dark, and finally said honestly, "I am not sure." For his naughty, brainless grandson, he really has nothing to do. "Then do you want to listen to me?" Regardless of whether the two agreed or not, Roja continued. "In the end, the question is what Luffy wants to be. As for your thoughts, it doesn't affect him at all. So we might as well leave the problem to Luffy and let him choose." "Pick your own." "How to choose?" the two asked together. "Acting." Roja smirked. "Carp, Shanks, acting." "Yes, play a good show, let Luffy see the evil side of the pirates, and let the Navy show the righteous side of the Navy. In this way, Luffy can see the strengths and weaknesses of both sides, and naturally he will make a choice." Quote. "But, how should I act?" Shanks asked with a tangled expression. On the other hand, Carp was also confused. When it comes to fighting, there are not many people in the world who can fight with them, but when it comes to acting. "Hee, are you making things difficult for me, Shanks?" Cap. "It's okay, I'll tell you this slowly on the way, but first, we have to find some supporting roles." Indispensable supporting role. Roja smiled mysteriously. A few hours later, Roja, Shanks, Garp, Jesus Cloth, and Aokiji appeared together on a pirate ship. Around them, there were pirates who fell to the ground, screaming and wailing. In the center of them is a man who looks in his 20s, wearing a black suit and wearing an odd-shaped cat's claw weapon in both hands. 100 strategies, Crow, captain of the Black Cat Pirates. Every. All uncles. No, I don't know what's the matter with the little one. Chloe sat on the ground, looking at Roja and the others. He was about to urinate. What the heck, who did he mess with, to let these big guys shoot 190 together? Just one of these people came out, and it was enough to kill them 10 times. What's the matter? Who said that the East China Sea is the weakest sea area? As long as he survives today, I will definitely hack him to death, and then never return to the East China Sea. Crow swore in his heart. Actually, it's nothing. We just want you to cooperate with us and play a show. Immediately, Roja told Chloe about his plan one by one. But I can't act, Crow said with a sad face. Snapped. Roja is a direct slap. Would you? I. Snapped. Will it be? Yes, yes, yes. I have loved acting since I was a child, and I acted very well. Crow nodded, covering his swollen face. It's very sensible. Roja rubbed Crow's head and stood up. The actors are in place, shall we begin? Okay. Carp and Shanks nodded with tangled faces. Behind them, Aokiji hurriedly turned around, said something, and ran to the other side of the boat. When Aokiji ran around the corner, a loud laugh suddenly came from the other side of the boat. Roja couldn't help but hook the corners of his mouth. Let the 4 emperors red hair pirates and Garp act. I am afraid that in this world, there will never be a second such extravagant crew. Chapter 68 Start 2 quarters. A few days later, at night, at the home of the head of the windmill village. The villagers in the village, except Luffy, gathered together, sitting upright on the chairs, looking at Roja and others on the stage. After Roja finished speaking the designed script, he asked. Everyone, I've made the plan very clear, and now I'm ready to assign tasks. If you have any objections, you can say anything. Do you really want those pirates to chop? A villager murmured. Don't worry, the pirates use dull knives, you just need to break the blood pack prepared in advance. Roja explained. But are those pirates accurate? Even if a blunt knife is cut on the head, they will die. Some villagers were still worried. Absolutely no problem. Roja smiled, pulled Crow aside, pointing to the bandage on Crow's body. Our actors have undergone rigorous training and will never have any problems, right? Crow, who was on the side, nodded again and again with a sad face. Indeed, he had undergone rigorous training, allowing the crew of the Black Cat Pirates to cut each other with blunt knives. This training was really strict, so strict that his sternum would crack. But nothing. Roja became a little impatient. Each person is 100,000 berries, and the 500,000 berries that have been chopped off. If you don't agree, you can leave immediately. 100,000, 500,000, a year's harvest is not so much. The villagers' eyes immediately turned red. I act. I'm going to play the chopped up. I'm also being hacked. I'm very skilled at pretending to be dead. I'm only skilled. I was chased by bears before, and I just survived by pretending to be dead. Seeing this, Roja nodded with satisfaction, and the actors were all gathered. At this time, Luffy was still lying at home sleeping soundly, unaware that the most luxurious performance in the world was about to unfold around him. The tense rehearsal unfolded on the mountain behind the windmill village, and finally, the day of the performance came. Ah, Shanks, you're back. On the pier, Luffy jumped to meet the pirate ship that docked. Yo, Luffy. Xiao Luffy, you don't wait for us at the dock every day, do you? Ha ha ha, Luffy, grow taller again. Everyone from the Red Hair Pirates got off the boat and greeted Luffy happily. From time to time, it can be seen that a few pirates have stiff smiles, and after hurriedly saying hello, they stay away from Luffy. No way, there are always a few pirates who can't act at all. Little devil, have you cried again recently? Remember that men can't be afraid of pain, let alone cry. Lackey rubbed Luffy's head with a careless look on his face. Hearing this, the pirates shivered, and their expressions changed immediately. Sure enough, Luffy was very unhappy to be treated as a child by Lackey, so he jumped on the wooden box and took out a dagger from nowhere. I've had enough. I'm no longer a child. I want to prove it to you. Saying that, Luffy picked up the dagger and was about to slash his face. But before he could make a move, the dagger was taken away when his hand was empty. Okay, Luffy is an adult, we'll invite you to drink juice later. Shanks rubbed Luffy's head and laughed. Humph, Shanks, you guys will perfunctory me. Luffy turned his head, jumped off the wooden box, and ran away. Watching Luffy go away, everyone in the Red Hair Pirates breathed a sigh of relief at the same time. Lackey, you idiot. Lackey boss, you should also pay attention. I frightened me to death, I felt Carp's murderous aura just now. Everyone denounced the culprit Lackey. Behind a reef not far from the pier, Garp silently handed the crushed telescope to the sailor beside him. Roha also retracted his gaze, breathed a sigh of relief, and turned his head. The first act was successful, prepare for the second act. Cheers, brothers. Cheers for Luffy's courage. Cheers to our great journey. In the tavern, the people of the Red Hair Pirates started their usual carnival, a lively scene. The conversations between Luffy and Shanks, Beckman and others were also deliberately guided, gradually turning into the fun and hardships of pirates, intended to let Luffy thoroughly understand the life of pirates. However, Luffy, who has a stubborn personality and wants to be a pirate, is completely left ear in and right ear out. The fun of pirates goes in and never comes out again, and the hard things are simply ignored, making Shanks depressed. At this moment, the door of the tavern was pushed open. Excuse me. Chloe, who was wearing a black suit, walked in swaggeringly. Luffy didn't notice that at this time, Crow's back was already soaked in cold sweat. Thinking of what the terrifying teenager said to him outside the bar, Crow's legs couldn't help but soften a little. If you screw up, you will die. Bracing his legs, Crow walked to the corner of the tour with difficulty, straightened his collar, and sat down with a smile. The distance from the pirates is very far, but the distance from Luffy is very close, which can ensure that what he says can be heard by Luffy. Beautiful lady, please bring me a glass of wine. Chloe snapped his fingers and called Makino. Luffy on the side stared at Chloe with some doubts. This guy is not afraid of Shanks and the others. At this time, Makino had brought a glass of wine to Chloe, and when he was about to leave, Chloe suddenly said, Miss, wait a minute. Huh, what's the matter, sir? Seeing that Chloe was whispering beside Makino for a while, and finally hurriedly finished drinking and left the tavern, he passed Luffy when he left. Luffy, who has been staring at this side, keenly noticed that before leaving, Chloe smiled strangely. Hey, Makino, what did that person tell you just now? Luffy entangled Makino and asked curiously. You mean the man in the suit? Makino wiped the table while pretending to be indifferent. He asked me about Shanks, knowing that Shanks and the others are pirates, and there is no navy nearby. Looked very scared, and hurried away. Oh, that's it. Luffy nodded, as if thinking about something. At this moment, an exclamation suddenly came from beside him. Lackey, look, you stepped on me. Hey, sorry, I didn't see it. Lackey scratched his head, a little embarrassed. Step on, see, step on, step on. Luffy raised his head sharply, looked at Shanks, and wanted to say something, but in the end he didn't say anything, put down the juice in his hand and hurried outside. Behind them, everyone breathed a sigh of relief when they saw Luffy running out. In this scene, the most difficult thing is to let Luffy himself notice the strangeness of Chloe. If they can't detect it, they can only use the method of calling Luffy and letting him go out to buy things to proceed to the next link. Chapter 69 Luffy's Overlord Color, 3/4. As soon as he went out, Luffy saw Chloe, who had just walked into the distance, and followed quietly. After a distance of about 200 meters, Crow suddenly turned his head and walked into an alley. Luffy hesitated for a while, came to the entrance of the alley, and looked inside. I saw that in the alley, in addition to Crow, there was another man in black and masked. At this time, Crow was bowing and talking to the man in black. "How's it going? There is only a group of stupid pirates and a few militiamen in the town, and there is not even a shadow of a navy." "Okay." The man in black nodded. "Go to the pier to signal and start moving. Remember, not one will be left." Inside the alley, the conversation between the two continued, but Luffy outside the alley couldn't listen anymore. On her face, the look of horror was palpable. Although he was outside the alley, listening to the conversation between the two was a little vague, but he could also hear the purpose of the two. "They are pirates. To loot the windmill village. Shanks must be told quickly." Luffy tiptoed back, and when he was 10 steps away, he turned around and was about to run. Boom! Just as he turned around and started running, Luffy was horrified to find that there was a figure standing behind him. He couldn't dodge in time, and suddenly hit the opponent's leg and fell with his head up. Looking up, Luffy's pupils shrank suddenly, and K-103 Luo in the alley appeared behind him at some point. "Yo, isn't this the kid who stayed with those stupid pirates? Why are you here?" Chloe smiled grimly. I. Boom. Thump. Suddenly there was a sharp pain in the neck, Luffy's eyes went black, and he fell down. Looking at Luffy who fell to the ground, the man in black took off his face towel. It was Roha. "You're talking too much nonsense." Roha gave Crow a cold look. Not next time. Not next time." Crow shivered and apologized repeatedly. "Tie him up, then go back to your boat and continue playing." Roha took out a bundle of rope and threw it on the ground. "Remember, in a performance for a while, cut one, you kill one, hack one, you are dead. Go." The fierce killing intent was scattered, and Cloden was soaked in cold sweat, so he quickly tied Luffy, and then hurriedly ran towards the pier. When Chloe's figure disappeared at the corner, Beckman slowly walked out of the shadow on one side. Everything went well. Beckman stood beside Roha and asked lightly. "Of course, it's time for you to appear next," Roha said with a smile. "Well," Beckman nodded, lowered his head and lit a cigarette. In the midst of the smoke, Roha's figure gradually blurred in his sight, just like in his memory, the gradually blurred impression of Roha. He can't understand Roha anymore. Whether it is the sudden increase in strength or the sudden appearance of the Dimensional Brigade, he does not know where Roha came from. Alternative. And GT, most importantly, Royana's script that was as accurate as a prophecy made Beckman chill. How much does Roha know? What is the purpose? In the first place, why was it so coincidental that it landed near the Red Firth? The more I think about Beckman, the more afraid, Roha, who is regarded as a younger brother by everyone, will really do some unforgivable things. "Roha, Shanks treats you as his own brother," Beckman said suddenly. Roha's body suddenly froze, and then he turned his head and looked directly into Beckman's eyes. "Everyone in the Red Hair Pirates is my relatives." Roha's expression was unprecedentedly serious. "Huh." Beckman took a deep breath of smoke and nodded. "Okay, then let's continue." It didn't take long for Roha to bring Luffy to the dock. At this time, Luffy had woken up from a coma and struggled constantly. "Let me go. Damn it, let me go. Hey, did you hear me? Let me go. If you don't let me go, when Shanks and the others come, you will be finished." Luffy twisted back and forth, trying to kick Roha, but the rope was so strong that he couldn't even move his legs. "Pirates. Save you. Kid, don't make me laugh. That group of stupid pirates actually buy wine and drink. It's a shame for pirates." Roha lowered his voice and said with a smirk, "If you want something, just grab it, this is the pirate." Saying that, Roha took out a flare gun and shot into the sky. The dazzling signal flares took off with thick smoke, emitting a dazzling light. At this time, the villagers who were working near the dock also noticed the abnormality here and rushed here one after another. "Luffy, what's wrong with you? Who are you?" "Everyone, someone kidnapped Luffy." Seeing one villager after another, surrounded by shovels and harpoons, Luffy suddenly became anxious. "Don't come here. Go and call Shanks and the others. Pirates are coming. Everyone, run." But no matter how Luffy shouted, the villagers still stubbornly surrounded him. Seeing the usual little bastard Luffy shouting so desperately that his voice was a little hoarse, and the expressions of some villagers with poor acting skills gradually became serious. For a while, the scene was dignified. At this moment, several gunshots were heard in the distance. The villagers behind the crowd were stunned for a moment, then they crushed blood bags and fell to the ground. Blood spreads on the ground. Who fired the shot? Look over there, there's a boat coming. It's the pirates. The pirates are here. The crowd suddenly panicked, and a few people were even more terrified. Although they had practiced various situations during rehearsal, these villagers living in small villages inevitably felt fear from the bottom of their hearts when they saw the pirate ship. "Run! Go find Shanks!" Luffy shouted hoarsely. The crowd immediately dispersed and ran towards the village. But at this time, the pirates had already landed, and Gia smiled and chased after the villagers. He raised his knives and fell, and the villagers fell to the ground one by one, and the ground was stained with blood. "Don't! Why are you doing this?" Luffy stared at Roha's bloodshot eyes, staring at Roha, as if to see Roha's face clearly through the black cloth, and engraved it in his heart. "Why, kid, do you think being a pirate is just playing a house?" Roha held Luffy's hair and let him watch the villagers die, one by one. "Little devil, listen to that woman. Don't you want to be a pirate? Study hard, this is what a pirate should do. Killing, robbing, and stealing treasure, this is the fun of a pirate." "No, no," Luffy roared with tears in his eyes, "you are not pirates. You are just a bunch of executioners. Shanks and the others are pirates." "Childish kid," Roha sneered. At this moment, a group of people suddenly rushed out of the town, and the woman in the front hurried over when she saw Luffy. "Luffy!" Makino stumbled towards this direction. A pirate suddenly greeted him, raised a knife in his hand, and was about to cut it off. "Don't! I saw with my own eyes that the elders in the village were killed, and now Makino is about to die before my eyes." Luffy, who was already on the verge of collapse, couldn't take it anymore. His eyes suddenly turned blood red, and suddenly an invisible ripple emanated from his body and swept the entire town. Luffy awakens, Overlord is domineering. Chapter 70 Cheating, 4/4. Mass, playoff. Roha covered his face, looked at Luffy who was knocked unconscious by himself, and looked at the pirates and villagers who were all around him, with a helpless expression. The original script was that when Makino was about to be killed, Shanks in the rear made an emergency shot to kill the pirates in seconds, and then the red-haired pirates killed the pirates. But Roha never expected that Luffy would awaken the Overlord at this time. But fortunately, he pinched Luffy in a timely manner. "And rescue. What about Roha?" Shanks walked over with a frown, looking at Luffy who had passed out in a coma, with undisguised exclamation in his eyes. "Luffy, this kid, can actually awaken the Overlord, which is really beyond his expectations." Garp, who was behind the reef in the distance, patted Aokiji's shoulder with excitement, extremely proud. "Did you see? His grandson has awakened the Overlord." As for what to do with acting, Garp didn't care, and happily ate senbei. "What else can I do? Wake up the unconscious person, put on a good posture, and I will wake Luffy up in a while." Roha rubbed his temples, "Try as fast as possible. By the way, don't forget to act according to the original plan." Roha reminded suddenly. "Good." Shanks looked cold, nodded, and quickly brought people to prepare. During the period, Luffy showed signs of waking up once, but was stunned by Roha mercilessly again. "Brat, if it weren't for your troubles, how dare you make trouble?" On the other hand, the green pheasant behind the reef was stunned by Garp's sudden words. "I'm here to play." Shinzi pointed at himself in disbelief. "What's the situation? Didn't it say that Garp came to play it?" "Well, yes, I suddenly thought about it just now. After all, I am still Luffy's grandfather. If I try to save him, it will not reflect the majesty of the Navy. It is better for you to come. Carp patted Aokiji's shoulder with a serious face. My grandson will be handed over to you, don't let me down. Chingzi stuttered, how could he still play like this? There's nothing wrong, I'll leave it to you. You must grasp the timing of the shot and show the strength of the Navy. It's best to use the strongest power directly to completely shock my grandson. Do you understand? Carp said sternly. I understand. Aokiji twitched the corners of his mouth. What is feng shui rotation? He is. During the rehearsal 2 days ago, he laughed at Carp and the others, but he didn't expect it to be his turn now. However, since it was the request of the most respected Mr. Carp, Aokiji couldn't refuse, and could only accept it reluctantly. Time passed little by little, and after 10 minutes, the scene was finally ready. Hey, my head hurts. Where's Makino? Luffy woke up frowning, and as soon as he opened his eyes, he felt a whirlwind, and saw Roha taking him back and forth again and again. At this time, Luffy had time to observe the surrounding situation. I saw the pirate rushing towards Makino, kicked away by Shanks, and fell mercilessly on the beach. The members of the Black Cat Pirates shivered when they saw Shanks and others, and withdrew back. Do you want to meddle in your own business? Chloe stepped forward and said coldly, I advise you to leave here quickly. This village, our Black Cat Pirates want it. Shanks, watch out, they have guns. Luffy, who was carried by Roha, shouted loudly, but before he could finish speaking, Roha pinched his mouth. Abruptly held back. Oh, is it? Shanks smiled playfully and took 2 steps forward. Luffy didn't notice, and everyone in the Black Cat Pirates, whom he thought was dangerous, shrank their necks in unison. If you guys dare to take another step forward, I will kill this kid. Roha suddenly picked up Luffy and put a knife on his neck. Is this kid with you? If you don't want him to get hurt if. The people of the Black Cat Pirates laughed a few times, and their faces were full of arrogant smiles. Damn, you bastard, Luffy cursed angrily, looking at Shanks who was in a dilemma. What did you say? The blade in Roha's hand approached Luffy again. At this moment, there was a sudden chill behind him, and the next moment, a tall figure appeared behind Roha and pointed out. The ice crystals spread, and Roha froze most of his body almost instantly, and Luffy in his hand was also snatched by Aokiji. At this time, on the distant sea, a naval warship was approaching at high speed. Navy. Blue Pheasant. The 2 pirates froze in unison. After Shanks and the others confirmed that Luffy was safe, they laughed and slipped away, not forgetting to say hello to Luffy before leaving. Luffy, let's go first. Little Luffy, it's so much fun. And the Black Cat Pirates rushed up viciously. Kill him, save the boss. Crow wielded 2 cat claws and slashed. The pirates behind him shrank their necks, and finally swooped up. According to the script, the next step is for the Navy to show off its mighty power, clean up the Black Cat Pirates, and then detain them. Although it sounds simple, the pirates do not know if this group of uncle-level navies will keep their hands because they are acting, and the headback is purely a manifestation of fear of pain. Ice Cube 2 Spears. Chingzi didn't mean to talk nonsense at all. With a casual call, several halberd-style ice spears appeared in an instant and shot out. Immediately, the pirate directly opposite him was stabbed in the opposite direction, clutching the big hole in his chest, fell to the ground in horror, and made no sound. Silence _. The whole place was dead silent. Crow's mind was blank, his hands were shaking, he stood a few steps away from Aokiji, looking at each other in disbelief. Really? Looking at the dead subordinates, Crow was terrified. How is it different from what I said before? Shouldn't the back of the knife and fists be used? Didn't you promise not to kill people? Didn't you say let them go after the show? Crow couldn't stand the depression in his heart any longer, and shouted hysterically, You! Scoff! An ice spear passed through his chest, and Crow fell to the ground with an uneasy look on his face. Before dying, he vaguely saw that the pirates were being brutally slaughtered and fell one by one. Behind the green pheasant, Roja in the ice crystal slightly hooked the corner of his mouth. Only if these scum pirates are dead, the drama will be more real, right? Chapter 71 Aokiji. If not Navy, 1/4. By the pier, the one-sided massacre ended almost instantly. Facing the general-level combat power, these little pirates had no ability to resist at all. With a wave of Aokiji's hand, it can kill a large piece of it. After completely eliminating the Black Cat pirates, Aokiji hurried to Luffy's side. "Are you all right?" Aokiji squatted down, and with a swipe of his finger, the ice blade on his fingertip opened the rope, helped Luffy up, checked it up and down, and then heaved a sigh of relief. "I happened to be chasing pirates and passed by, and the lookout found out the situation here. Fortunately, I didn't come late." Shinzi rubbed Luffy's head and said, "How is it? Are you all right?" "I'm fine." Luffy pushed Aokiji's hand away and ran to the villagers who were cut down. "Uncle, come and save them with me." Aokiji raised his brows and quickly grabbed Luffy. "Don't touch the injured, our ship's doctor will be here soon." What a joke! If this makes Luffy pass by, it will be debunked at a glance. Hearing that there was a doctor, Luffy also calmed down. After a while, the warship docked, and the ship's doctor rushed down and began to treat nervously. Aokiji led Luffy to sit on the side of the stone, silent. Luffy, who was sitting beside him, secretly glanced at Aokiji, his eyes erratic. What a joke! He is the man who wants to become the Pirate King, and he will never have anything to do with this great-looking uncle in the Navy. Although this uncle saved him, he will not be shaken. "I don't know, did Shanks escape?" Luffy muttered in a low voice. He had no idea about Shanks' escape. Isn't it only natural for the pirates to see the Navy run away? He was saved anyway. At this moment, an adjutant suddenly came to Aokiji. "Sir, the emergency treatment has been completed, should we go? If it's too late, the red-haired pirates will run away." Aokiji said without thinking, "I won't go." "But, sir, if you let the red-haired gang go, you will be considered dereliction of duty." The adjutant was a little anxious. "Bogart, we are the Navy, we put the people first. If we leave, the villagers who lack professional treatment are likely to die." Aokiji stared. But, get it. Bogart hesitated for a while, and finally left with a salute. "Uncle, you saved everyone, why does your boss punish you?" Luffy said suddenly beside him. Aokiji raised his brows and was speechless. "Kid, isn't your brain circuit clearer? At this time, shouldn't you be moved by the fact that the Navy would rather suffer the crime of negligence than help the people?" "While," Aokiji said, "because the Red Hair Pirates are a group of big pirates, if they are let go, it will cause more casualties to the people." After finishing speaking, before Luffy could speak, Aokiji continued to ask, "By the way, I seem to have seen the redheads just now, do you know where they are?" "I don't know." Luffy didn't hesitate. "Aokiji, why are you so open-eyed and talk nonsense?" Not even blushing. Two people, one big and one small, stared blankly. After a while, Aokiji let out a sigh of relief and nodded helplessly. "Well, I don't know if I don't know. By the way, little guy, are you interested in being a Navy?" After saying that, Aokiji clenched his fists quietly. Success or failure is here. Luffy was stunned for a moment, then shook his head. "Sorry uncle, I don't want to be in the Navy." "Why?" "Just because the Navy has a lot of rules. Didn't you see today's tragic situation?" Aokiji was a little unwilling, pointing to the villagers who fell to the ground. "Only the Navy can save them and prevent this kind of tragedy from happening again." "Happened. $0. Isn't it possible for pirates? Why does it have to be the Navy?" Luffy suddenly interrupted Aokiji. His face was more serious than ever. "There are good people and bad people among pirates. If I become a pirate in the future, I will meet again. This kind of pirate will definitely beat them up. Sean. M. Why does it have to be the Navy? Aokiji was a little stunned. He wanted to say that the Navy represented justice, and that it was only natural to pursue pirates. He also wanted to say that the Navy had a mature intelligence network that could pursue pirates. He also wanted to. But he couldn't say it all, because people who weren't in the Navy could do more. Intelligence can be bought, and pirates can be killed by everyone. If he is not the Navy, he can go to the New World to kill, and there is no need to worry about the 4 Emperor pirates going to war with the Navy, and even if there is a chance, he can kill some notorious 4 Emperor cadres. Although he would fall into a great crisis, if it is for justice. Seeing Aokiji, who suddenly fell silent, Luffy tilted his head, suddenly wanted to get up, and jumped off the reef. By the way, Makino seems to be frightened. I'll go see her. After speaking, Luffy turned around and ran towards Windmill Village. Before leaving, he glanced at Chingzi. Seeing that there was no sign of this very powerful uncle looking for trouble with him, he ran away with confidence. Click, click. After Luffy left, Roha shook and shattered the iceberg and walked out. Master, are you still going? Roha turned to look at Garp, who came down from the battleship. No need. Garp's expression was a little sad, and it could be seen that his grandson's actions to protect the pirates made him a little uncomfortable. Leave some people here to heal the villagers, and after the treatment is over, leave a few elites to secretly protect Luffy. Aokiji, let's go back to Marin Fando. Yes, Mr. Carp. Aokiji followed in a daze. After sending Garp away, Roha turned around and flew into the sky, and a few minutes later, he appeared on the Red Foss. To Roha's helplessness, the people of the red-haired pirates actually started the banquet so quickly. Yo, Roha, come have a drink. Someone raised a glass to welcome Roha. Yes, to celebrate the successful conclusion of our show. Roha, what happened in the end? Luffy is still not a pirate. Someone asked curiously. Dang, Roha nodded, causing a burst of cheers from the pirates. Coming to Shanks, Roha sat down. What? Don't say goodbye to Luffy. Stinky boy, you know I'm not used to that kind of thing. Shanks laughed and handed over a glass of wine. Come on, to celebrate the success of this show, don't get drunk today. Oh, underscore. Cheers. At this moment, an exclamation suddenly came from the corner of the deck. It's over. The devil fruit is gone. What? That robbed rubber fruit is gone. Look around and see if it's dropped somewhere. Everyone on the deck immediately put down their wine glasses and began to search, but found nothing. Suddenly Lackey in the corner said hesitantly, did he fall into the tavern? Ah, the crowd exclaimed. Lackey, you rambunctious guy. Shanks scolded with a smile. Huh, Lackey suddenly pointed at Shanks' head, where's your straw hat, boss? Holding the grass, it seems to have fallen into the tavern too. Ha ha ha, boss, don't you also get lost? It's up to you. Roha, who was on the side, smiled and took a sip of wine, leaning on the fence to look at the direction of the Windmill Village, and the scene of Luffy returning to the tavern, eating the rubber fruit, and picking up the straw hat appeared in his mind. Fate is so elusive. This night, it was a rare night for Roha to relax. He didn't think about anything. He only had beer in his hand and only friends beside him. In this atmosphere, Roha was drunk. When he woke up, it was already the next morning, and when he opened his eyes, he was actually lying on the deck, surrounded by people lying all over the place. Roha couldn't help but curled his lips. The 967 guys, relying on their good physique, would be on the deck every time they finished drinking. If they were replaced, ordinary people would have been seriously ill. Rubbing his head and standing up, Roha saw Beckman standing on the edge of the fence at a glance. Wake up. Beckman nodded to Roha, then threw the Dream magazine in his hand to Roha. This kid above, is Jesus Cloth's child. Huh. Roha blinked and looked at the cover of the magazine. When he saw Usopp on the cover, he remembered that the original issue of the magazine was the part of Usopp on board. Yes, Roha nodded. The above is also true. Beckman's expression suddenly became serious. Roha was stunned at first, and quickly reacted. Beckman said that it was estimated that Usopp's unfortunate childhood and the death of his mother. Roha nodded, looked at the people around him, paused when he saw Jesus' cloth, and said suddenly, "If I didn't draw the One Piece manga, it would be true, but isn't there now?" Roha smiled lightly. Tell the world about the tragedy in advance, so that the good people don't have to die tragically, the bad people can be changed, and the occurrence of evil is avoided. This is the purpose of my painting One Piece. Hearing this, Beckman paused, took a deep look at Roha, and nodded. I see. After explaining something about the cause and heart disease of Jesus Boo's wife, Usopp's mother, Roha no longer hesitated and turned to leave. The matter here is no longer his responsibility. With Shanks and the others, it is not a problem to rescue Usopp's mother. Counting the time, Monet and the others should have already arrived at Seymour Jiji village, but they just don't know what the meeting of the two brats, Zoro and Sanji, will be like. With curiosity about the early meeting of Zoro-Sanji, and a sense of achievement in saving Shanks, Roha flew at high speed in the sky. Chapter 72 Loneliness and Defeat. A day later, in Seymour Jiji village, outside the Yixin dojo, Roha slowly landed. Walking into Yixin dojo, Roha saw at a glance the logs placed in the corner of the yard and the houses that were all demolished to the first floor. Seeing this scene, Roha was stunned for a moment, and then snickered in his heart. It is really strange to use this method to avoid Guina's death. As for such a bizarre idea, Roha doesn't have to think about it to know that 80% of it was conceived by Zoro, a boy who doesn't like to use his brain, but he doesn't know how people like Kushiro can accompany Zoro crazy. Just as Roha stood at the door of the dojo and looked around, a childish exclamation suddenly came from behind. Ah, brother Roha. Just as Roha turned around, Sugar's small body had already plunged into his arms. Roha took advantage of the situation and turned around with Sugar, and the happy little Sugar's face flushed. Have you thought about my brother? Roha nodded at the little nose of Sugar. Yeah, Shatang nodded excitedly, I miss my brother every day. Well, my brother misses you too. Roha rubbed Sugar's little face again, and immediately raised his head to look at the four women who came. Monet, Arturia, Masaka Makoto, Shirai Kuroko. When the four of them greeted each other, their expressions were different. Monet and Arturia didn't need to say anything, but the other two, Roha, were a little confused. Masaka Makoto, why are you blushing and turning your head when you see me? Don't look at me, sir. And Kuroko Shirai, I understand you, Lord, but why are you blushing? Sexual orientation changed. Is it? Roha touched the corner of his eyes subconsciously. When he was treating Shirai Kuroko, he seemed to be too nervous and had no ability to restrain this mole at all. At this moment, Roha suddenly discovered that there was no one left. Where's Sanji? Roha asked. Unexpectedly, when they heard Roha's question, several people actually laughed, and even the Sugar in Roha's arms laughed out loud. At this time, the two of them should duel in the back mountain. Monet said softly. Now this time, duel. Roha was suddenly full of black lines. Judging from the situation, these two guys may not have been fighting for a day or two, and they have already played regularly. I just don't know who is more powerful. If Sanji loses, his master as a master is really shameless. Shaking his head and dispelling the thoughts in his mind, Roha decided not to go to those two little guys, but to visit Kushiro. After all, Kushiro is also the owner of this place, so visiting first is the most basic courtesy. After talking to the people in the dojo for a while, Roha waited in the dojo, and after a while, he saw Kushiro who came in a hurry. B.U. Me tilde C. Sure enough, just like in the anime, it is a smiling squinting, but C is not simple. Just by looking at the other party, Roha can feel the vigorous sword intent in the other party's body. Dimension Brigade, Agent, Roha. Kushiro bowed deeply to Roha as soon as he entered the door. Thank you for saving my daughter. Thank you so much. During this time, Kushiro learned through the channels of the Revolutionary Army that the Revolutionary Army had conducted countless field investigations on the One Piece comic, and the results of the investigation were surprising. Everything in the comics turned out to be true, whether it was the places and landscapes in the comics, the characters that appeared on the scene, or even the characters' personalities, they were all exactly the same as in the comics. Knowing this result, the Revolutionary Army also made bold guesses. That is One Piece comics, which is basically a book of prophecy, a tool used by coats to change certain things. Hearing this news, Kushiro was terrified for a while, but fortunately he believed in the comics, otherwise, his daughter Guina might really die. It is precisely because of this that Kushiro is full of deep gratitude to Gauchi and even everyone in the Dimension Brigade. So that as soon as Monet and the others came to the door, they only learned of the existence of Roha from their mouths, and Kushiro gave him the greatest welcome, and even gave up his master bedroom. When Roha came, he put down the teaching in the dojo and hurried over to thank him. Startled by Kushiro's bow, Roha was stunned for a moment, and then he understood the reason. Mr. Kushiro is polite. Mr. Gauchi is also out of cherishing talent and does not want to see a swordsman genius like Ji Yuyina die early, so he drew Ji Yuyina. That's what I said, but I still want to repay your group for saving my daughter. If your group has any request, please feel free to mention it. Hearing this, Roha frowned and thought. Before coming here, he was just curious and wanted to see if Kushiro believed in comics and saved Guina, but he really didn't want anything. However, Kushiro said so, and Roha's mind became alive. The most valuable of Kushiro is his swordsmanship and famous swords. Thinking of swordsmanship, Roha's heart heats up. After a while, a plan flickering took shape in his mind. Since Mr. said so, I'm not polite. Roha pondered slightly. We want Mr's swordsmanship, preferably the one that completely records Mr's swordsmanship experience. Jonku. Kushiro paused, raised his head and asked, yes, but I want to know what you want Jonku to do. Kendo experience, for every swordsman, is second only to life. If an ordinary person said this, Kushiro would probably turn his face directly. But the Dimensional Brigade saved Guina's life after all. I don't want it. Roha shook his head. It's a cadre in our regiment who has suddenly risen up recently and wants to gather the strengths of hundreds of swordsmen and seek a breakthrough. Of course, we will not want Mr's swordsmanship in vain. Here is a sword and the swordsmanship we obtained from exploring the ancient ruins in exchange. Saying that, Roha took out Sandai Onishito and handed it to Kushiro. This is 3 generations of ghosts. Before he could refuse, Kushiro was attracted by the sword in front of him, and tremblingly stretched out his hand and stroked the blade. It's really 3 generations of ghosts, this is too precious. Kushiro raised his head excitedly. Seeing this, Roha smiled slightly. This is exciting, wait a minute and don't scare you. It's just a knife. Compared to Mr's life experience, it's still cheaper, but I think if you add the next few sword tricks, it will be enough. Sword art. Kushiro looked at Roha curiously, and wanted to know what sword art was so valuable, it could be more important than the 3 generations of ghosts. The acquisition of this sword art can be regarded as a coincidence. We found it on an unnamed tomb. There is no name on the tomb, just a line of words. Having said that, Roha paused slightly, his face solemn. Kushiro couldn't help listening and was very attentive. Sword demon Dugu Chocho is invincible in the world, so he buried his sword in Sri Lanka. Woohoo! The heroes are tied, the sword is empty, and it is not sad for the husband. Roha murmured this classic line in a low voice, with a faint expectation in his heart. Shanks can understand the alternative usage of the domineering and domineering in Romance of the 3 Kingdoms. I don't know what Kenshiro, the strong swordsman, can understand in the words of Dugu seeking defeat. Chapter 74 Dugu Sword Art, 4 Realms of Kendo. In the dojo, Kushiro was sitting behind the table, holding a cup of tea in his hand, and was stunned. Sword Demon Dugu is invincible in the world, but buried his sword in Sri Lanka. Woohoo! The heroes are tied, the sword is empty, and it is not sad for the husband. After rereading this sentence, Kushiro was shocked beyond words. Just based on these words, Kushiro can feel the invincible tyrannical spirit of this senior without even seeing him. Once, his realm of the peak of Kendo was nothing more than the title of the greatest swordsman in the world, but after reading this sentence, he was completely insane. The heroes are tied, the long sword is empty, and the husband is not sad. This is the style of a real strong man. This is the realm that the #1 swordsman in the world should have. Is there anything else? Kushiro couldn't wait, so even if he was so strong in Kendo, even if he left only a few sentences of Kendo experience, it would be enough to raise his Kendo cultivation one step further. Roha ignored him, but continued talking to himself. When we saw this sentence, we were also very shocked. A companion opened the tomb out of curiosity, thinking that the tomb would contain the senior's swordsmanship secrets or Kendo experience. But none of these things were in the tomb at all. Quote. When Kushiro heard this, he was inevitably a little disappointed, and the psychological gap was huge. Seeing Kushiro's sudden change of face, Roha felt a good laugh in his heart, as expected of Jinda, a means of dazzling people's appetite, which can be applied anywhere. Kushiro has forgotten that Roha is going to make a deal with these words. How can it end so easily? Roha took a slow sip, tea, and then slowly continued. Although no Kendo secret book was found, we found a few swords at the bottom of the tomb. How many? Kushiro subconsciously looked at Sandai Kitaru on the table. Could it be that the 3 generations of ghosts were found in that tomb? And how many magic weapons of the same level are there? In front of those swords, we saw the most precious thing in the tomb, a few lines of words. Character, cheats. Kushiro's mind picked up again. The first one is a sword that still shimmers with cold light, and its sharpness cannot be overstated by blowing hair and breaking hair. Blow the hair and break the hair. Kushiro raised his brows. Although he had never heard the word, it did not prevent him from understanding the meaning. He immediately had the desire to try it with his own saber. Soon, Kushiro suppressed the desire in his heart, because he knew that the main event was coming. In front of the sword, there is a line of words engraved, fierce and fierce, all-conquering. Before the age of 20, it will compete with the heroes in the field. Fierce and fierce, invincible. Kushiro frowned, thoughtful. Then there is the position of the second sword, but there is no sword at all, only a line of words. The content is, the soft sword of crepe myrtle, used before the age of 30, accidentally hurting a friend is ominous, it is abandoned in the deep valley. Soft sword. Kushiro was stunned and looked at Roha with doubtful eyes. Roha twitched the corner of his mouth, and then he remembered that there seems to be no soft sword in this world. Software is a kind of sword with a soft blade that can be bent left and right at will. It uses Kimin swordsmanship. When it is used, it makes the opponent feel dazzled and dizzy, and it is impossible to judge where the next sword will come from. This kind of sword, the scabbard, is also very special. It is not a whole piece, but a piece of small pieces. After the sword is put back into the scabbard, it can be used as a belt around the waist. When fighting, it can play an unexpected role. Saying that, Roha used his hand to write, dipped in tea, and drew the outline of the software on the table. And this sword? Kushiro's eyes lit up, and with his experience in Kendo, he could see the viciousness of the soft sword at a glance. If it was the first time to fight against it, even he would suffer a big loss. On the other hand, after Roha finished painting, he continued. In the third position, there is a completely black, unremarkable sword. The most amazing thing is that this sword has no blade. At that time, someone wanted to pick it up and look at it, but everyone didn't know it. What comes to mind is that this sword is extremely heavy, at least several hundred pounds. Quote. In front of the sword, there is still a line of words, the épée has no sharp edge, and it does not work well. Before the age of 40, it was rampant in the world. The épée has no edge, and it doesn't work. Run the world. Hearing this, Kushiro suddenly collapsed, sword intent burst out from his body, crushed the teacup in his hand, and even sprinkled the tea on his trousers. He didn't move at all. With a light glance at Kushiro, the corner of Roha's mouth twitched. Unexpectedly, Kushiro could really taste something from this. However, Roha did not give Kushiro the time to taste it, and continued. In the fourth position, we saw a wooden sword that was more than half decayed. Wooden sword. Kushiro stared at Roha stubbornly, and there was still a shock on his face. He had a vague feeling that the 4 sentences corresponding to these 4 swords probably represented the absolute realm of kendo cultivation. In front of the 4th sword, it was written. Having said this, Roha paused for a long time, then took another sip of tea to moisten his throat. The last big dish must be served slowly. On the other hand, Kushiro's sword intent was condensed in his body, his eyes were bright, and he stared at Roha, for fear of missing a word. The last line of words reads, after the age of 40, don't stick to things, all plants, trees, bamboos and stones can be swords. From then on, you will gradually progress to the realm where no sword is better than sword. Boom. As soon as these words came out, there was a sudden bang in Kushiro's mind, and his mind was blank, only the words, no sword wins with sword, remain. He knew that it was definitely the highest realm of kendo. It was the realm he wanted to achieve the most in his life. At this time, in Kushiro's mind, the path of kendo had never been so clear. Fierce, invincible. The swordsmanship is ever-changing, surprisingly easy. The épée has no sharp edge, and it does not work well. And finally, the realm without a sword is better than a sword. This is the quadruple realm of kendo practice. After a little self-examination, Kushiro found his position. After the second realm and before the third realm, he could reach the third realm with just one kick. Ha ha, ha ha ha, ha 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 ha. Kushiro suddenly burst into laughter, and his face was full of joy. After a while, he stood up and bowed deeply to Roha. Thank you for your point. Kushiro will never forget today's kindness. If there is any request in the future, just mention it, and I will do my best. Kushiro knew that if Roha hadn't told him these 4 sentences today, it would have taken him at least 10 years to realize the essence of the third realm. And now, within a year at most, he will surely enter the third realm. Chapter 75 Peerless Blade, 4 quarters. Really figured it out. Roha raised his eyebrows. He could feel Kushiro's heartfelt pleasure. I am afraid that his strength has to break through again. But after thinking about it, Roha wouldn't say it, and just verbally echoed Kushiro. Although Roha repeatedly advised Kushiro not to take it to heart, Kushiro didn't think so. In his eyes, these 4 sentences of Dugu seeking defeat are simply the supreme collection of swordsmanship, which can be called an inheritance. He Genshiro, Hida and Hinang, exchanged such a supreme treasure with just a single kendo experience. There must be something in return. Thinking of this, Kushiro no longer hesitated, stood up, and in Roha's doubtful eyes, walked to the main wall of the dojo, in front of the kendo. Picking up the lettering, he quickly tapped on the wall a few times. Click. With the sound of mechanical gears turning, Roha was surprised to see an iron box popped out of the wall. Kushiro pulled out the iron box with a solemn face and walked slowly to Roha. Originally, I wanted to give my saber and Daoyi character to your excellency, but after thinking about it, Hidaoyi character is totally not worthy of Senior Dugu's formula, so I simply gave this sword to Mr. so that the pearl will not darken. A sword more valuable than the words of Hidao. Roha froze in his heart, thinking of a certain possibility. He couldn't help looking at the iron box in Kushiro's hand with anticipation. Kushiro pushed the iron box a few times again, and after unlocking some kind of mechanism, he slowly took out a long sword in a blood-red scabbard. This is? Roha asked softly, Just by looking at it, he could feel the real blood on the knife. Definitely a murderous blade. This is the magic weapon passed down from generation to generation in the next family, the supreme sword, Muramasa. Demon sword, Muramasa. It was actually in Kushiro's hands. Roha's eyes widened when he heard the words. This demon saber is one of the top ranked among the 12 supreme knives, and its vicious name ranks first. According to legend, this demon sword was cast by one of the top swordsmiths in the world at that time, and it took 7,749 days and nights to cast it. When the village was about to be released, the sword caster withered all the energy, fell into a coma, poured into the sword furnace, and was burned alive by the fire, and the blood of his body was absorbed by the village. It is precisely because of this that the village is known as the world's #1 fierce blade, and has a great reputation. And the village is worthy of the name of the fierce blade. Every time he appears in the world, it will definitely stir up blood and rain, attracting thousands of people to die for it. This situation did not stop until 100 years ago, when the village was captured by a great swordsman. Since then, the village has never been seen again. Unexpectedly, this knife is actually in Kushiro's hand. Kushiro madly pulled out Muramasa, caressed the blade with his fingers, and had a look of reminiscence in his eyes. Back then, after my grandfather recaptured this demon sword in the battlefield, he passed away due to serious injuries not long after, and passed this sword to my father, but my father had no interest in kendo all the way, so he kept it sealed away. Use, when it comes to me. Having said this, Kushiro laughed at himself. Although I wanted to use this sword, but the bloody aura above the village is too strong, contradicting my swordsmanship, and it is harmful to use without any benefit, so I sealed it up again. Kushiro said, raising the knife in both hands and handing it to Roha. This time, Mr. saved Guina, and gave him the supreme formula. I can't repay it. I can only give this knife to Mr., and I hope that Mr. will not refuse, so as not to get dusted by the famous knife. Thank you. Roha did not refuse, and gently took Muramasa. As soon as he started, Roha felt a penetrating coolness from the knife, and drilled down Roha's arm towards his chest. Roha frowned slightly, and just when he wanted to resist the coolness, there was a sudden tingling in his wrist. The next moment, a holy aura suddenly poured out from his wrist, and wherever he passed, the coolness dissipated until it surged up to Muramasa. In Roha's perception, the penetrating coolness above the village was dissipated at an unbelievable speed until it disappeared completely. This is the power of the stigmata. With a slight start, Roha understood the reason for the change. The stigmata is one of the most powerful forces in the forbidden world, and it is the greatest gift given by the gods to the Son of God. How can something of this level allow the filth above the village to contaminate the host, and naturally it will be eliminated by 3 and 5. Kushiro's pupils shrank, and his mouth couldn't help but grow, pointing at Muramasa in Roha's hands, and he was speechless for a while. Having lived with Muramasa for decades, Kushiro naturally understood the evil intentions above Muramasa. Originally, what he meant was to let Roha hand over the village to the kendo powerhouse in the Dimensional Brigade, and let him suppress it with the supreme sword intent, but what he never expected was that Roha actually suppressed it himself. Looking at Muramasa lying quietly in Roha's hands, as well behaved as a cat, there were literally 10,000 grass and mud horses galloping past in Kushiro's heart. Muramasa, who had troubled him for decades, could be solved so easily. Hold the grass, can you give me some face? You at least hold on. Chapter 76 The Proud Masaka Makoto. Kushiro, who was hit hard, left in a hurry after getting the Tokugu sword art, written by Roha. Roha, who had a lot of harvest, also saw that Kushiro wanted to find a clean place to study kendo, so he didn't bother, and wandered around the dojo by himself. After walking around for a while, when it was almost noon, I suddenly heard a loud noise from the door of the dojo, and Roha went over to look curiously. As soon as he arrived at the gate of the dojo, Roha saw more than a dozen dojo disciples forming a circle, shouting something. On the other side, there was a helpless Monet and a lightly smiling Arturia. Looking at the open space in the middle of the crowd, Roha smiled suddenly. Hey, isn't this Sanji and Zoro? Why did they fight at the gate of the dojo? In the middle of the open space, Zoro was holding 3 wooden knives, and Sanji had a circle of wooden boards tied around his legs. They were pounding into a ball. You gave me a knife, and I kicked you. After a while, Sanji did not investigate for a while, and was thrown to the ground by Zoro with 2 swords in a row, completely admitting defeat. No way, Sanji has not received systematic training, and is not Zoro's opponent at all. Just when Roha thought that Zoro would take the opportunity to ridicule a few words, he saw Zoro hurriedly pull up Sanji with a look of flattery. Sanji, on the other hand, had a victorious look on his face, and walked out swaggeringly. What's happening here? Roha is a little confused. Is Zoro's temper so good? As soon as I asked Monet on the side, Roha knew that it was Sanji who made a small mistake on the first day he came here, made a large table of dishes, and completely conquered Zoro, who was rough in the gym. Since then, the two have fought back and forth, but when it's time for dinner, Zoro should confess and coax Sanji to let him cook. Ah, master. As soon as he walked out of the crowd, Sanji saw Roha and ran over with a look of surprise. But before he could run over, Zoro by his side had already surpassed him and hurried to Roha. You are the master of curling eyebrows. Zoro looked at Roha with a look of surprise. I am. What? Are you going to fight me? Roha joked with Zoro. No, no, no. Zoro waved his hand quickly, scratching his head, feeling a little embarrassed. That. I heard the curling eyebrows say, you are very good at cooking, that. Can you? Seeing Zoro with a twisted face, wanting to say but being embarrassed to say it, Roha snickered, and nodded before Zoro finished speaking. Okay, what would you like to eat? If you can't, then forget it. Huh, what did you say? Zoro suddenly reacted, raising his voice, really? Of course. Roha rubbed Zoro's head, tell me what you want to eat. Pork belly, barbecued meat, braised pork, deep-fried tenderloin. Although someone rubbed his head, Zoro was a little unhappy, but he jumped 3 feet high and excitedly told Roha the names of various meat dishes. Hearing the names of the dishes on Earth, Roha knew without asking, it must be Sanji who told Zoro. Sanji, come and follow along. Yes, master. In this way, Roha walked into the kitchen with 2 excited little devils. By noon, Roha's cooking skills completely conquered everyone in the entire dojo. Even Kushiro, who had been hiding in the bedroom to learn kendo, was attracted by the fragrance and ate happily. There was continuous laughter at the dinner, and during the period, Kushiro even teared down the scene of Zoro's eyes tearing down the house, saying it in public, making Zoro and Guina flushed. From some small actions, Roha can see that Guina has secret feelings for Zoro. These 2 little guys won't confirm their relationship early, and then go to sea together. Roha couldn't help thinking. Sauron and the female version of Sauron, the force of the 2, coupled with Guina's brain to make up for Sauron, is simply invincible. Is it possible to meet Luffy? Thinking about it again, the red-haired pirates are about to go to the hometown of Jesus Bu. It would be interesting to improve Usopp's life, or even take the mother and son directly to other places. Just as Roha was sitting there chatting with Kushiro and the others, he suddenly felt his feet kicked twice and looked up. Masaka Makoto, who was sitting across from her, stared straight at herself, her eyes rolling away. Roha blinked. Is something wrong? Masaka Makoto nodded, then found a reason to go out. Roha waited for a while and then walked out. After a while, Roha found Masaka Makoto outside the dojo. After hearing Masaka Makoto's words, Roha couldn't help raising his eyebrows. Are you going? Yeah. Masaka Makoto nodded timidly. Kuroko and I want to look around in this world. Look around. Do you think this world is safe? Roha's face suddenly became strange, and there was an urge to make Masaka Makoto popular in this world, but he still didn't say it. Masaka Makoto and Shirai Kuroko are still self-conscious people. They are not like Arturia, they have gone through so much, they have long lost the drive to roam the world, and instead cherish their daily life. After hesitating for a while, Roha took out a phone bug from the storage space, wrote his contact number on a piece of paper, and handed it to Masaka Makoto. You take this phone, if there is any danger, please contact me and I will arrive as soon as possible. Yeah, Masaka Makoto nodded heavily, took the phone bug with both hands, and placed it on her chest like she was holding a treasure. In terms of the strength of the two of you, as long as you don't go to the New World, there should be no problem. Remember not to underestimate those with fruit abilities. By the way, can you sail? I have learned during this period of time, and I can still handle some basic things. Then there's no problem. Roha twitched the corners of his mouth, should he be said to be a master of learning, and sailing can also be said to be learned. In any case, Roha didn't plan to persuade any more. Anyway, with the strength of Makoto and Kuroko, it would not be a problem to deal with some small pirate groups. When are you going to leave? Tomorrow morning, a passenger ship will pass by here. We plan to buy a small boat after going to the big city. Need money. That, Monet has given us some. Masaka Makoto's face turned red, and she lowered her head in embarrassment. It was said that Monet gave it, but it was actually Roha's money. For a moment, Masaka Makoto felt like she was being cared for. That's good, remember to be careful. Roha rubbed Makoto's hair, and after telling some of the bug fruit's abilities, he returned to the dojo. Masaka Makoto 1.9 stared at Roha's back, opened his mouth, and finally said nothing and sighed silently. At this moment, a pair of white, tender and slender hands suddenly wrapped around Makoto's upper body, and the hands slid to somewhere restlessly. At the same time, Kuroko's voice sounded in Makoto's ears. Sister, how are things going? Fortunately, he agreed. It was rare for Makoto to not electrocute her because of Kuroko's lewd behavior, but walked back to the dojo a little low. Behind him, Kuroko looked at Makoto's lonely figure, and couldn't help frowning, feeling jealous. Sister-in-law, you won't like that guy Roha. Even Kuroko didn't notice that her jealousy was not only against Roha, but a trace of it remained on Makoto. The black mole of love is gradually straightening the black spot. Chapter 77 Open the Era of Swordsmen. The next morning, when Roha woke up, Masaka Makoto and Shirai Kuroko had long since disappeared. For the departure of the two, except for Sha Tang, who was a little unhappy, the others did not have much reaction, and life continued. In this way, Roha and his party stayed in the dojo for a full week. When Roha was about to leave, Kushiro, who had been in seclusion, finally found him. When Roha saw Kushiro, he was really startled. At this time, Kushiro had withered and scattered hair, dark bags under his eyes, and a look of exhaustion on his face. He looked like he was overworked and could die suddenly at any time. Are you all right? Roha took a breath of cold air, feeling a little puzzled. Isn't it just a few words? As for how you did it, those who didn't know thought it was because he was too old to sleep for several days and nights. Roha didn't know, he really guessed right. Kushiro didn't sleep for 3 days and 2 nights in a row, and he realized Dugu's words of defeat all night. 27. It's all right, I'm fine, I've never felt better. Kushiro raised his eyelids, his tone full of exhaustion, but his eyes were brighter than ever before. By the way, this is the agreed sword score, among which I added some more, understanding the words left by Senior Dugu. Quote. Roha took the sword manual, flipped through it, and nodded subconsciously. It can be seen that Kushiro was very attentive when writing swordsmanship, from basic training, detailed explanation of swordsmanship, to kendo understanding, and life battle records, all of which were written word by word. The entire swordsmanship has tens of thousands so many words. Thank you for your hard work. Roha thanked solemnly. Even if Roha didn't know much about swords, he could see the importance of this book of swords. Sir, it's serious. Compared with Senior Dugu's words, my experience is not worth mentioning at all. Kushiro smiled a little ashamed. Pause. Kushiro suddenly hesitated and said, I have an unkind request, I wonder if Mr. Roha looked over curiously, please tell me. Kushiro breathed a sigh of relief, then suddenly bowed and spoke solemnly. I hope that Mr. Dugu can spread the swordsmanship of Senior Dugu to the whole world, so that all swordsmen in the world will no longer be confused. Set up a beacon for swordsmen in the world. This time it was Roha's turn to be surprised. Those words are really so awesome. After asking, Roha knew. It turns out that because of the lack of order in this world and the inconvenience of news dissemination, many swordsmen do not have a fixed inheritance, and they can't even get real teaching. They can only explore and cultivate by themselves. In this case, apart from the long-standing kendo family like the Kushiro family, who can have a certain planned training, the rest of the swordsmen have extremely chaotic training methods. Practicing physical fitness today and pace tomorrow, many people simply don't know how to improve themselves. In this dark situation, it is extremely simple for everyone to judge whether their swordsmanship has improved or not. Chopping trees, stones, and steel, the deeper the cut, the greater the progress, and the faster the sword speed, the greater the progress. The one who can use sword energy is Janao, and the one who can easily defeat Janao is Daijinhao. The basis for the judgment is that simple and crude. And judging the strength of the two's kendo cultivation is even simpler. One word, hit. Whoever can defeat everyone is the number one swordsman in the world, followed by the second, third, and fourth. Kushiro once was one of these people. But after hearing about Senior Dugu's experience, the first thought that popped into his mind was that the dark world of kendo has finally ushered in the dawn. 4 words and 4 realms can be used as a benchmark for the realm of kendo, so that all swordsmen will no longer be confused on the road of kendo. The sword style is fierce and indomitable, and it is the first realm. The sword skills are ever-changing, and the mastery of all kinds of moves can be used for one's own use, and it is the second realm. Swordsmanship returns to its original state. It does not depend on external objects. There is no trick to win. There is a trick, it is the third realm. When there is no sword in the hand, but there is a sword in the heart, when no sword is better than having a sword, it is the fourth realm. As long as the concept of these 4 realms is spread to the world, Kushiro believes that within 3 years, kendo will usher in the most prosperous period in thousands of years, and within 10 years, swordsmen like him will appear all over the world. Janao will no longer be synonymous with rarity. Everyone can become a swordsman. After finishing speaking, Kushiro looked at Roha nervously, and his heart hung up. In fact, even Kushiro himself did not believe that the Dimension Brigade was willing to make these 4 sentences public. After all, these 4 sentences are priceless treasures for swordsmen, even more precious than the number 1 divine soldier in the world. With these 4 sentences alone, the Dimensional Brigade can win over a large number of swordsmen to serve it. Time passed little by little, Roha lowered his head and didn't know what he was thinking, and Kushiro's heart gradually sank. I'm still a little fanciful. Kushiro laughed in his heart with a self-deprecating smile. At this moment, Roha suddenly trembled, and after a while, he looked up to the sky and laughed. Anyone can be a swordsman. Interesting, interesting. Roha's eyes flashed with excitement. He lifted Kushiro and patted his shoulder heavily. I agree. I'll put these words in the magazine tomorrow for everyone to know. After that, Roha ignored Kushiro's reaction and walked out with a big smile. Create a new era, belong to the era of kendo, and be admired by millions of people in future generations. Is there anything more interesting than this? Heaven doesn't give birth to me, Li Chunggong. Kendo is like a long night. Muttering the words in his memory in a low voice, Roha smiled happily. Does he count as cutting off the long night for all the swordsmen in the pirate world? Chapter 78 Shocked Whitebeard Pirates. The next day, when Roha and his party left Seymour Jiji village and returned to the Seven Waters, the new issue of Dream magazine was also released. When the 4 sentences of Dugu seeking defeat appeared in the magazine, the world shook. In the world, all the swordsmen are completely boiling because of Dream magazine. Countless swordsmen who have been stuck in the bottleneck for many years have tears in their eyes. They finally see hope for further progress. In an unknown mountain village, under an old tree. An old man with a withered face and gray hair, after reading the sword art of Dugu seeking defeat, his face was like a dead tree in spring. With a dazzling brilliance, he suddenly stood up from under the tree and walked quickly home. At this time, the old people around him chatting with him realized that this old friend's body was so tough. The white-haired old man, trembling all over, walked to a room where a coffin was placed, took out his beloved ancient sword from the coffin, sat cross-legged on the ground, with the ancient sword on his lap. His eyes were weeping, and he recalled the memory in his mind. Thousands. He was born in a Kendo clan. He carried his sword and raised his heart when he was young. He started practicing swordsmanship at the age of 10, and he practiced it for 30 years. At the age of 40, he left the family to go out and challenge the world's swordsmen until he won the title of Great Swordsman. But the nightmare also started from that time. He fell into the praise of others and became a little arrogant, and his swordsmanship was unable to go any further. This situation lasted for a full 10 years. Seeing one backup after another rising on the road of Kendo, his mood gradually became low, and he had no face to go home. Until the age of 50, he could no longer bear this kind of gap, and he came to this small mountain village, buried his sword in a coffin, and did not ask about Kendo. Thus he became a lonely old man with no children and no daughters. It has been 10 years. He had already stepped into the coffin with one foot, but he never thought that before he died, he would actually be able to see the hope of making a breakthrough in Kendo. Old man, I've suffered for you all these years. With tears in his eyes, the old man gently wiped the ancient sword that had followed him since childhood, and closed his eyes resolutely. In this life, if I can reach the 4th realm, it will be worth it. No regrets though. A corner of a city. A burly, muscular blacksmith exuding a steel-like luster, with a solemn expression, he put Dream magazine in his heart, threw aside the blacksmith's hammer that he depended on for a living, and walked towards the back of the shop. Behind him, a huge blacksmith hammer smashed the ground into a deep depression. When I came to the back hall, in the center of the back hall, there was a sword platform. On the platform was a giant sword that was 2 meters long and 2 palms wide. He picked up the giant sword with a gentle expression, and just as he was about to carry it behind his back, the blacksmith suddenly sounded the words of Dugu begging for defeat. The épée has no edge, it's too clever to work. Close black lens bracket. Frowning, the blacksmith put down the giant sword, put it in an iron box, put it on his back, picked up a door-like giant sword in the corner, and walked out the door. The giant sword has not yet begun to strike, but it is also suitable for him to practice swordsmanship. Walking out of the door, he turned his head to look at the blacksmith shop where he lived for 7 or 8 years. A trace of unbearableness flashed in the blacksmith's eyes. The next moment, the unbearable turned into a decision. The sword came out, slashed horizontally, and the blacksmith shop turned into a ruin in an instant. Neighbors were immediately attracted by the sound, and happened to see the back of the blacksmith walking into the distance. "Gran, what are you doing?" someone asked curiously. "Practice sword." Garon continued on without turning his head. Every step he took, the aura on his body became sharper, as if he was breaking free from the shadow that had bound him for many years. When he walked to 100 paces away, he was full of sword energy and rushed into the sky. His fighting spirit was soaring. War, the world's swordsman, use war to raise swords. When you reach the 3rd realm, you can resume your love sword. A swordsman who truly pursues Kendo, does not seek money or fame, but seeks Kendo diligence, and has no regrets in this life. However, because of this, when countless swordsmen reached the bottleneck in swordsmanship and realized that they were very likely to be unable to improve again in their entire lives, their minds were hurt and they quit sadly. But now, Roha's Dugu swordsmanship has made countless swordsmen go out of their homes and return to this turbulent world. These people, without exception, are all strong in the road of Kendo, only because they have been incognito for many years, they seem to be unknown. Now, the road of Kendo will start anew, and it will definitely set off a huge wave. New World, aboard the Moby Dick. A group of pirates looked at the new issue of Dream magazine and were amazed. Hey, Beasta, how's it going? Is this Dugu's claim to be true? Is he really as good as the magazine says? Someone suddenly asked. Unfathomable. Beasta bowed his head, holding a Dream magazine in his hand, wondering what he was thinking. Hey, what are you thinking? Marco popped out suddenly and put his arms around Vista's shoulders. What realm are you in? The third realm, or the fourth realm? Hearing this, everyone on the boat turned their curious eyes to Beasta. As companions in the same boat, everyone knew that Beasta's swordsmanship was strong, and it was a rare rival. Naturally, they were curious about what realm Beasta was in. Nonsense, Beasta must be the fourth realm. I don't think so. The description of the fourth realm is too mysterious. I think the third realm is more reliable. What's the mystery? I have seen Beasta beat a swordsman without a sword with my own eyes. It must be the fourth realm. There was an argument. Stop arguing. Marco clapped his hands with excitement, or let's play a game and see who guesses right. Okay, I'll beat the third realm. 100,000 bellies. The fourth realm. 100,000. I'm pressing the third realm. A piece of gold. When it came to gambling, the pirates became interested, and after a while, the bets in front of Marco piled up into a hill. Hey, Beasta, what realm are you in? Malca patted Beasta's shoulder. At this time, Beasta seemed to come back to his senses, looked up at Marco, and then looked at his companions. Second realm. Silence. What? Impossible, how could it be the second realm? That's right, it's too much to say about the second realm. The boat suddenly became noisy, but no matter how noisy they were, Beasta didn't respond, just lowered his head and didn't know what he was thinking. At this moment, Whitebeard suddenly came over with a big laugh. Gee la 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 tilde tilde, boys, don't argue, Beasta is the second realm. It's really the second realm. Marco was shocked and couldn't believe it, but since Dad said so, he couldn't help but believe it. It's the second realm. Whitebeard sat down and took another sip of wine. Gee la 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 tilde tilde, this realm division is quite interesting. Although I don't practice swords, I can see that it is not a division of strength, but the comprehension of kendo. Quote. The reason is very simple. If you let an ordinary swordsman with average physical fitness understand the second realm, can he defeat the first realm of the giant swordsman? Wouldn't he still be hacked to death by the giant? There are many factors that affect strength, and the realm of kendo is just one of them. But I think that if the strength is the same, a person with a higher level can completely crush the swordsman of the first level. Chapter 79 The Cheap Eagle Eye Fourth. On the Moby Dick, Whitebeard drank and explained to everyone. Beasta is taking the path of hundreds of changes and sharp moves. In light of his understanding of the second realm, there are few people in the whole world who can be stronger than him. But it is also because he has delved into the second realm so deeply that he has trapped himself in the second realm and is difficult to break through. I thought Beasta would be like this all his life, but I didn't expect that the Dimension Brigade would be able to come up with such a thing. Suddenly, Whitebeard patted Beasta's shoulder with a big laugh. Come on, when you break through the third realm, go to Mahawk to practice and see who is the best between the two of you. Yeah, Beasta nodded heavily. It's just that his heart is still a little heavy. He once thought that he and Mahawk were only a little bit different. It wasn't until he read Dugu Chofeng's words that he knew that on the road of kendo, Hawkeye had long since thrown him away. That guy is probably the fourth realm. A great route, an unknown sea area. On a lonely boat, Hawkeye looked at the Dream magazine with a solemn expression. The sword intent in his body was galloping endlessly, and fish corpses floated from time to time in the sea beside him. Sword Demon Dugu is invincible in the world, but buried his sword in Sri Lanka. Woohoo! 220 heroes are tied up, their swords are empty, and they are sad for their husbands. When he saw this sentence, Hawkeye's hand trembled involuntarily. Even if he is now known as the greatest swordsman in the world, he is still far from the realm of this Dugu seeking defeat. Just being invincible in the world, he can't do it. Looking down, when he saw the first 3 realms, Eagle Eye nodded subconsciously. The summary is in place, even more incisive than he thought. Based on this, with more practice, his swordsmanship can be a little stronger. Continue to read. When I see that plants, trees, bamboos and stones can all be swords. Since then, he has been intensively cultivating and gradually progressing to the realm where no sword is better than sword. Hawkeye couldn't help but froze. This kind of realm, even he has not thought about it at all. Subconsciously, he broke off a piece of wood from his side, and the sword energy filled his body, and the Eagle Eye waved his hand and a sword was cut out. Scoff! The fierce sword chi instantly slashed out along the wooden stick, split the sea, and smashed a reef 100 meters away. But at the moment when the sword chi left the body, the wooden stick in Hawkeye's hand was overwhelmed, and it exploded instantly and turned into pieces. Seeing this result, Hawkeye couldn't help frowning, his face turned gloomy. This sword, compared to the effect he used with an ordinary sword, was even a little bit worse, and even 1/10 of its power was not exerted. In other words, he did not reach the 4th realm at all. It can only be regarded as stepping on the edge of the 4th realm. Sword Demon Dugu seeks defeat. Hawkeye's eyes burst with fighting intent. He finally has a challenge goal. Although he wanted to immediately kill the capital of the 7 waters and question Dugu Chu's whereabouts, Hawkeye still stopped the desire to fight in his heart. If Dugu Chofeng can really reach the perfect 4th realm, then he is just humiliating himself by going now. Even if he wins by virtue of physical fitness and combat experience, it is only a victory for a reckless man, not a victory for a swordsman. It is better to challenge and seek breakthroughs when the mirror is about to break. At this moment, the sound of wood breaking suddenly came from beside him. Hawkeye froze for a moment, turned his neck little by little, and looked towards the center of the boat. I saw that in the center of the ship, where the mast was originally erected, there was only a broken piece of wood left, and the mast and sail were unknown. Turning to look at the sea, you can see faintly, a touch of white floating on the sea. That's his sail. Looking at the sails floating on the sea, at the broken mast, and at his own hands, the corners of Hawkeye's mouth twitched. He just seemed to, maybe, accidentally snap the mast. Looking at the boundless sea around him, Hawkeye only felt a strong headache and could not wait to slap himself. What the hell is going on? Do I still have to use a dash? The world's largest swordsman, Hawkeye, is rowing forward. The swordsman 4 realms that appeared suddenly spread across the world at an astonishing speed. The sudden appearance of swordsmen one after another, and the duel of the strong one after another, shocked everyone in the world. It turned out that the swordsman was so strong. It turned out that there are so many swordsmen in the world. As the saying goes, Confucianism is chaotic with literature, chivalry is forbidden by martial arts, and the appearance of many swordsmen has greatly challenged the ability of the local navy. These guys who are infatuated with swords never care where they are or whether there is a navy around. As long as they see a strong swordsman, they want to challenge it. Once a fight broke out, houses were demolished, or entire neighborhoods were destroyed. At the beginning, the navy will send people to suppress it. Until a swordsman with a giant sword on his back was provoked by the navy, and he was forced to live among thousands of navies. After losing 2 lieutenant generals in a row, even the navy had to change its policy and no longer use force to suppress this. A group of swordsmen with explosive force. Do your best to supervise every guy with a sword. If the other party has the desire to duel, they will be invited to the specially opened duel arena. If you really do not move, send someone to evacuate the crowd, and then manage the swordsman to ask for repair costs. Of course, not every swordsman will take care of the navy, and not every swordsman has money. Fortunately, these guys who are infatuated with swords are quite good at talking outside of kendo. Over time, the duel venue is placed in a place where no one else is. Among them, there are many swordsmen who lack interpersonal experience. They were entangled by the Navy in the way of asking for repair costs, and finally recruited into the Navy in various ways and became non-staff people. The Navy solved its own troubles and expanded its strength, but the pirates were not happy. Are these idiots carrying swords so sick? Isn't Lao Tzu just robbing ships, robbing villages? Why do you care about everything? It is also famously said that in order to understand the heart of the sword is shot. Do you think you are the Navy? The Navy doesn't have any of you guys, okay? Not only did he take heavy shots, but he killed a boatload of people at every turn, and one or two were so stubborn that they chased and killed before they could kill them all. I heard that there was a pirate group that was chased for a month, and finally died of exhaustion. Half the boat, the rest were all chopped to death to feed the fish. For a while, in various sea areas, when pirates robbed, they must first look around to see if there is a guy with a sword alone, and no more robbing. But this didn't last long. After a pirate group was killed by a white-haired old man with a wooden stick, the pirates went completely crazy. This time they don't look at the sword. As long as there are lonely people around, and they are not afraid of them, they still carry something that can be used as a swordsman. It doesn't matter whether you are a wooden stick or an iron fork, a willow branch or dead wood. Don't think about it, let go immediately, just run as far as you can. The whole sea, because of Dugu's words of seeking defeat, has come to an unprecedented moment of tranquility, and the number of pirates' robbery has dropped sharply. Chapter 80 Dispute of the Sun Pirates 1/4. Time flies and flies by. In the blink of an eye, 2 months have passed since the appearance of Dugu Chue Siji. During this time, the world was turbulent. First, a large number of swordsmen disrupted the world, and then the revolutionary army led by Drago successfully rescued the kingdom of Goya in the East China Sea. The revolutionary army officially appeared in front of the world. However, the impact of these two events was completely overshadowed by a major announcement from the world government. The naval marshal abdicated and was promoted to the general marshal of the whole army. Veteran Lieutenant General Garp still refused to be promoted. The new generation of lieutenant generals, Kuzan, Sakaski, and Pelusrino were promoted to generals, becoming the highest standing force of the Navy, and called 3 generals, shocking the world. This change in the Navy was several years earlier than Roja remembered. At this time, Roja had already ended his journey and returned to the capital of Seven Waters. He was sitting in the yard, flipping through a handwritten book. On the table next to him, there are 2 other copies, all hand-copied without exception. In his hand is Kushiro's sword manual, and the other 2 are Arturia's swordsmanship experience and Shanks's. That's right, Roja wants to start practicing swords. This trip made him realize one thing. Only your own strength is really strong. If he can learn a sword skill well, it will greatly increase his strength. Because swordsmanship exists in his memory, whether he becomes accelerator or uses stigmata amplification, he will not lose this skill. Think about it, learn swordsmanship, know how to manipulate the airflow to form the sword energy, trigger the stigmata, and use the supreme swordsmanship used by the saint's constitution. Roja couldn't help laughing. 2 words, invincible. Crunch, underscore. Just as Roja was flipping through the sword manuals, the door to the yard suddenly opened. Arturia walked in with a smile. Come back. How many did you call today? 3. Arturia stretched her waist long, revealing her curves. There is one with good strength, and it has been handed over to Monet. Hearing this, Roja nodded and handed the cake that had been prepared long ago to Arturia. Arturia was not polite, took the cake, sat next to Roja, and ate it. Her face was filled with happiness and contentment. Looking at Arturia's delicate profile, Roja's thoughts felt far away. If Dugu seeks defeat, the influence is far greater than he expected. Not only swordsmen challenged everywhere, but some people who admired Dugu and wanted to defeat, or wanted to challenge, came to the Seven Waters and found Monet. Of course, it is impossible for these swordsmen to meet Monet and a woman, but it is annoying enough to just stay in front of the magazine every day and follow Monet to get off work. It happened that Arturia had been idle for too long, and her hands were itchy, so Roja asked her to kill these people. Is greater than or equal to. The face of the sword rank, Arturia, who has an A-level intuition. These swordsmen are not much worse than a fiasco. Occasionally there are one or two people who can compete with Arturia, but they will not last long. Of course, Arturia did not use any noble phantasm when she was fighting. Not to mention, among these people, Roja has also found some good guys who are under his command. Among them, the upright swordsman was given some kendo experience by Shanks and Kushiro by Roja, and arranged to be responsible for the security work of some magazines. There are also some people who are suitable for walking in the dark. In addition to the experience of kendo, Roja has consumed the few remaining fragments of Shokuhoukai, psychological mastery, gave spiritual hints, and was arranged by him to another place. Thinking of this, Roja couldn't help but think of Kushiro in his mind. He couldn't help but chuckled in a low voice, and it turned out to be a monster when he squinted. What's wrong? Arturia asked curiously when she heard Roja's laughter. It's okay. Roja gently wiped the cake from the corner of his mouth for Arturia. Starting today, teach me swordsmanship. Really? Really? Roja nodded. Is my teaching very strict? Are you sure you want me to teach you? Arturia confirmed again. No, it's fine. Roja had a bad premonition in his heart. Ah, it hurts. Slow down. Slow down. Okay, the rhythm is just right, continue. Almost, it feels okay, you can use some force. Stop, 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 it's too fast, I'm a little out of it. Take a break, I can't take it anymore. In the yard, Roja was sitting on the ground, rubbing his bruised arms. Was it because he was using too much force and grinned? Opposite him, Arturia was holding a wooden sword, her face blushing. I always feel that you are saying something very bad. Arturia blushed. How is that possible? It must be your illusion. Of course Roja couldn't admit it. Thanks to the transformation of the dragon heart, the scars on his body soon faded a lot. Roja patted his butt, picked up the wooden knife and stood up again. Come on, go on. Roja's bad voice continued to echo in the yard. It's cool, come again. Is the pace going like this? Advance and retreat, advance and retreat. Actually, I prefer to stab people with a gun rather than with a sword. I remember you can also use a gun, how about you teach me someday? Great root, sun pirates. All the crew members gathered on the deck in a circle, and in the middle of them was a little girl. Kurla. Although they had learned of Kurla's existence in Dream magazine, when they actually met Kurla, it was still a little unbelievable. In the comics, Tiger died because of this little girl. Boss, what should I do? Someone asked. What should I do? It's enough to just throw her into any human town, why don't we send her away? What if it's true in the comics? Someone said excitedly. What nonsense are you talking about? Look at her appearance, do you look like a child who can survive alone? Jinbei on the side reprimanded sharply, and the Murlocs who were stared at by him all bowed their heads. What do you think of Aaron? Someone suddenly asked Aaron who was beside him. What do you think? Listen to the boss. Aaron hugged his shoulders and replied casually. After seeing Aaron's expression, Jinbei frowned slightly but didn't say anything. 1.0 has been this marginalized attitude ever since the new issue of Dream Talk magazine was published, which portrayed Aaron as a vicious Murloc. Jinbei knew that Aaron did this to prevent his companions from hating him for what he did in the manga. Maybe in the past, Jinbei could still use comics to be comics, not really to protect Aaron. But now that Kurla has appeared, this reason no longer makes sense. With a silent sigh in his heart, Jinbei decided to have the opportunity to enlighten Aaron. Send her home. Suddenly, Tiger, who had been silent, made a decision. Boss can't do it. Boss, The Navy must also read comics, they are probably waiting for us to go there. Could it be because of the Navy that we have to give up a life? Tiger suddenly shouted excitedly. Then what is the difference between us and those selfish Tianlong people?